Deep beneath the Oregon wilderness, in the underground corridors of Hemlock Federal Detention Center, time didn't pass. It eroded. Cell 14 sat at the very end of the corridor, a square box of cold steel, lead-lined walls, and no windows. Every time the steel door slammed shut behind the guards, the sound echoed like bones splitting open. Kayla Monroe sat motionless on the metal cot. The overhead fluorescent lights bathed her face in a harsh, sterile blue-white hue. This was the same face that once hung on the wall of valor of the Federal Rapid Response Force. Now it was just a prison record. Inmate 711K. She never looked at clocks. Hemlock had no clocks, but Kayla still counted, by the drip of water from a corroded vent, by the footsteps of guards changing shifts, by the broken dreams that repeated again and again. It had been 173 days. Each night she whispered through the dark, recalling coordinates long buried, missions that never made it to report, names of those who once huddled in foxholes by her side, and one name that never left her mind. Rook. No one ever mentioned Rook in the interrogations. No papers, no trace, as if that dog never existed. But Kayla knew. Rook was being held in animal quarantine in the Eastern Wing, locked down tighter than the classified archives. They didn't dare move him, because they knew. Rook only followed one voice, and that voice was being erased. There were nights Kayla would whisper his name, slowly, quietly, just to see if a bark might echo back through the vents. But there was nothing. Only the hollow moan of wind dragging through iron pipes, cold, unforgiving, as if the place was engineered to melt all living things into silence. Sometimes she forgot who she was, but she never forgot who betrayed her. Kayla Monroe no longer breathed from habit. She breathed to survive. From the slow, steady inhales that once let her slip past death in pitch-black tunnels to the shallowest of exhales, the kind that made no sound when your enemy stood inches beyond a wooden wall. She once survived a booby-trapped refugee camp that way. And today, she used those same breaths not to answer a single word in this cold, white room. The metal chair beneath her was bolted to the floor. She wasn't cuffed, but the chair didn't move. Kayla sat tall, spine like steel, eyes fixed on the ceiling. It was covered in gray acoustic foam, two faint cracks spreading like quiet fault lines waiting to erupt. She stared at them as if they might tear open and swallow this room whole. Across from her sat a man in a white lab coat. No name, no rank, no personnel file. Just a tablet in his hand, and a pair of black-rimmed glasses, the kind you'd cast on background characters in psychiatric thrillers. Kayla Monroe. The voice was emotionless. We're simply assessing whether you're still coherent enough to participate in the rehabilitation program. Kayla didn't turn. Not from fear, but because she'd learned one thing. Those trying to break you can't stand silence. We're not here to dig up the past. This is just a psychological screening per internal protocols, the man continued, voice flat as a scanner beam. Given your time in high-intensity combat zones, we're aware of possible delayed effects. Still, she said nothing. The overhead light cast a sharp, icy glow across the table. His fingers flicked through digital folders with just enough friction to make a soft, persistent rustling, like someone deliberately trying to unnerve her. Do you often experience recurring dreams? Do they feature dogs, gunfire, the smell of burning metal? Do you ever feel like you're being watched? Kayla narrowed her eyes. That wasn't part of standard psychological assessment. They weren't here to help her. They were here to see if she was still lucid enough to leak the wrong thing. And they were failing. The man stood, his chair scraped gently back, The heels of his shoes hit the floor with dry, precise taps. "We'll return later," he said. But he didn't leave right away. "One more thing," he added at the door. "That dog Rook doesn't exist in any system." He tilted his head. "Maybe it's just a figment of your imagination, Kayla." Then he left. The door slammed shut. Kayla didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her lips pressed together just slightly, like something inside her was about to boil over. A cold bead of sweat slid down the back of her neck. Not from fear, but because they had just made their first move. They weren't using force, not yet. No beatings, no threats. They were using documents. That day, a new guard came. Young, glasses. Didn't know how to keep his distance from Kayla. He dropped her food tray, and beside it, casually, stupidly left a stack of smudged military files, probably thinking they were harmless, misrouted memos. Kayla wasn't supposed to touch them, but the guard forgot to lock the door. 7 minutes. 7 minutes was all it took for someone who'd once infiltrated foreign intelligence servers to memorize an entire document at a glance. The file didn't have her name. No Monroe, no Rapid Response Unit, no trace of Operation R/217, the Black Op, where Kayla had taken a bullet and nearly bled out in a jungle ambush that never made the records. She ran a finger along the paper's worn crease, the kind formed from frantic folding under fire, and on the last page, printed in red, K9117, scheduled for biological disposal pending clearance from Command Sector 9. Kayla's throat tightened. She had once seen a K9 injected with the final dose labeled Combat Ineffective. The look in that dog's eyes had haunted her for 3 years. It was quiet. It was human. It begged to stay. But Rook wasn't just any dog. Rook had pulled her out of a building seconds before it exploded. Rook had torn out the throat of a mercenary to protect unarmed civilians. Rook had collapsed beside her in a toxic gas tunnel, lungs failing and still barked, just loud enough to draw in help. And now, they dared call that biological disposal? No report, no farewell, no independent assessment, just erase, like he'd never been. Kayla folded the paper, slid it beneath the cold metal mattress. Her heartbeat thundered like she was already back in a live fire zone. She didn't know what she would do next. Only one thing was certain. They couldn't touch Rook first. When the guard returned this time with another meal and a note clipped to the tray, Kayla lifted her head for the first time in weeks. She smiled, not wide, not fake, just the faintest curl of her lips, like she was whispering something only she could hear. "You can delete my name from the system. But I'm still here." And in that moment, Kayla Monroe, the woman once honored in military dispatches and never spoken of again, made a choice. If the world no longer remembered who she would rewrite the story herself. In blood, and in Rook's bark, the memory returned. Without warning. Like the scent of damp earth after the season's first rain. Like the low growl of thunder rumbling through ancient jungle. Like those obsidian eyes sharp as a blade, but never threatening, staring straight at her from behind a dusty red training cage. Colombia. Her first year deployed as a tactical operations liaison on the southern border. The base sat buried in dense rainforest, a NATO-backed K9 outpost under Pentagon jurisdiction. On the first day, Kayla stepped off the chopper with her boots still caked in Afghan highland dust. She'd never heard of Rook, then listed simply as K9117, the only dog in his shipment returned as unfit for pairing. "That one's trouble. Don't trust people. But 3 handlers already," muttered a black officer named Mendez, pointing toward the last cage in the row. Kayla looked, and there it was, that look, Rook's stare, meeting hers for the very first time. No barking, no growling, just standing in the shadows, head held high, ears sharp, as if asking, "Will you turn your back too?" She walked forward, stopped at the bars, said nothing, didn't reach out. She just stood there, breathing gently, looking into his eyes. 15 seconds passed. Rook didn't move, but his tail began to lower, not in fear, but in something else. Surrender. Or maybe trust. "This one's mine," Kayla said. No permission, no waiting for approval, just a command the way she did everything in life. The first week, Rook refused to eat from her hand. By the second, he began to take food, but wouldn't let her touch his neck. By the third, the first night of jungle rain, he curled up silently by her tent. No sound, just presence. They didn't need words, only proximity. The unit started jokingly calling Rook the Shadow, because wherever Kayla went, he followed, standing behind her, sitting beside her. Always quiet, always watching. Rook never walked ahead, never let her fall behind. Then came that June afternoon. A routine patrol near a coca field zone, and a trap sprung. 3 men down in under 3 minutes. Smoke, gunfire is like rainfall. Kyla lost from the group, signal dead, trapped in jungle green. That's when Rook appeared. No armor, no chip, just paws tearing through brush, followed by a leap, a blur, as he tore into the man raising a rifle behind her. Screams exploded into the trees. Kayla spun. Rook was already on top of the attacker, standing firm on his chest, blood dripping from his jaws, but his eyes never left her. From that moment, Kayla understood. This dog wasn't trained. He chose, and he had chosen her. Colombia, southern border. A jungle maze of rotting heat and ghosts sounds the smell of wet decay, monkeys howling in the canopy, and shafts of light that pierced the treetops like the glow behind a stalker's back. That was the final mission. Codename: Crimson Ridge. Objective: cut off weapons routes linked to cartel boss Alarico Vargas, a man the CIA believed had quiet ties to senior U.S. military officers, including one name Kayla had never dared question: Derek Van Hurst. The plan, according to command, was simple. Land at the drop point, seize intel, extract before sundown. No bullets, no casualties. But everything blew apart within 8 minutes. Bullets ripped the air, IEDs detonated underfoot, and someone screamed over the radio, "Fall back! They knew we were coming!" Kayla tumbled down a ravine with Rook, her body slamming into roots, lips split open from the impact. The last thing she heard in her earpiece: "Cut the signal, leave them behind." Leave them! Them? No one in her unit ever spoke that way about their own. Kayla ripped out the earpiece, threw it. She understood now. They'd been sold out. And she and Rook were never part of the exfil plan. The next 3 days were a retreat through darkness. No supply, no map, just blood, mud, and tropical insects biting skin raw. Kayla dug a bullet out of her own thigh with a rusted knife salvaged from an abandoned hut. Rook stood in the doorway the whole time, unmoving, despite the gunshot graze bleeding down his shoulder. That first night, they slept beneath jungle leaves. Kayla burning with fever, barely conscious. Rook growled low at every nearby rustle, then gently licked her wound, as if saying, "You're not alone. I'm still here." Day 2, they found a stream. Kayla drank in shaking gulps. Rook waited only by lapping the water after checking for chemical traces. That evening, they saw the choppers. Not rescue. Purge. No flags. No insignia. Just the black triangle is the mark of the internal cleanup crew. Kayla gripped the Glock in her trembling hand. 3 bullets left. 1 for her, 1 for Rock, 1 for whoever stepped into range first. But no one came. The helicopter circled once overhead, then vanished into the clouds. On the 3rd day, they stumbled near the boundary of their old base. Kayla was barely standing, but Rook took off toward a distant wooden shack, barking twice before looking back at her. Then he ran ahead again. Kayla didn't understand, but she followed. When she reached the shack, beneath a tarp weathered by time, was a gray hard drive, etched on the side R/217, copy 02, not authorized. Rook had sniffed it out, led her there as if to say, "You need to take this." Kayla held the hard drive to her chest, stepped out from under the tarp, looked up, and for the first time in 3 days, she cried. Not from pain, not from fear, but because she finally knew. From this moment forward, she wasn't just a survivor. She was a threat, and Rook was the living proof. Kayla set the hard drive on the rotting wooden table. Her right arm was still dripping blood. She swiped it aside. She had never believed in second chances. But this time, if there was any crack left in the system, anyone out there who hadn't been bought, she had to try. That's when she remembered Grant. An old teammate exiled to Iceland for tactical dissent. Flawed, yes, but never one to sell out the truth. Kayla powered up a battered military transceiver. By sheer luck, the battery still had a sliver of life. Her fingers, cold and shaking, typed out the encryption command. The screen blinked. Secure transmission confirmed. Off-grid device. 0:00:47 seconds. Less than a minute. She unplugged the hard drive. Connected. Uploaded the clips. Mercenaries opening fire on unarmed civilians, a command issued in a voice unmistakably like Derek Van Herst's, and a black dog cutting across the gunfire, wearing a K9117 patch. Finally, she typed, "I'm alive. I have proof. They're hunting me. You're the only one I trust. Kilometer." She hit send and sat still. 9 seconds later, message received. Then, nothing. Silence thick as blood. Kayla leaned against the wooden wall, closed her eyes. Rook curled up beside her, his black coat trembling in the cold night. She placed a hand on his head, thumb brushing over the old scar behind his ear, the one he got during the Yemen op last year. "We're gonna be okay," she whispered. "This time, no one gets left behind." But by dawn, everything changed. The chop of blades tore through the trees. Special ops stormed the shack like a tidal wave. Kayla had barely opened her eyes before she was slammed to the ground, face pressed into the dirt. Rook growled, lunged toward her, but 3 tranquilizer darts hit him in the neck in less than 4 seconds. "No, stop!" Kayla screamed, thrashing. "I'm Officer Monroe. I demand a direct line to command." A soldier knelt beside her, handed her a document. It wasn't a rescue order. It was an indefinite detention warrant, signed by Derek Van Herst. "You're being detained for violating combat protocols and disseminating classified information," the man recited, as if she were a package being processed. "And Rook?" Kayla twisted her neck. Trying to glimpse through the soldiers, 2 men were dragging her dog away. "The dog? It'll be processed through biological disposal?" The words sliced down her spine. Her hands were cuffed. and in that final glimpse, she locked eyes with Rook. His pupils glazed red from the tranquilizer, but wide open, still searching for her. "Don't be afraid, Rook. I'll come back for you. Even if no one believes. Even if the truth gets buried." She would come back. And next time, it would be war. 16 weeks after her capture, Kayla Monroe vanished from the internal system logs of Hemlock Detention Facility, and not a single alarm went off. No one knew what had happened. No one dared ask. Only one man knew, and he was waiting for her in the dark. Grant Wexley, former chief engineer of the Counter-Intel Division, the same man who once clashed with Derek Vanhurst for refusing to falsify data from the Yemen operation. Exiled to Greenland, stripped of rank, but not of memory. Now he lived like a ghost in the machine, breathing through backdoor circuits and fragments of code he'd built himself. That night, Kayla was seated in Interrogation Room 3, minutes from being transferred to the Behavioral Rehabilitation Complex, a place no one ever returned from. Then, the lights flickered twice. No one noticed except her. Kayla understood. An old extraction signal, the kind used during hostage rescues when radio silence was the only option. She nodded. Just once. 10 minutes later, the fire alarm sounded. Guards scattered. She was redirected to the medical decontamination sector, a long corridor lit by flickering fluorescents and lined with biometric scanners. But the scanner stayed silent, because Grant had already altered her fingerprint data, reclassified her as Technical Staff Class C exempt from monitoring. The door slid open, and at the far end of the hall, through the manufactured smoke, a figure emerged. Tall, lean, gray jacket, remote control in hand. "Hello, Monroe." The voice was graveled, aged, but unmistakable. Kayla didn't hug him, didn't cry, didn't whisper his name. She just extended her hand. And Grant took it. "You know," she said quietly, "I thought I was already dead." "No," Grant replied. "They just erased you from the world." He glanced at the wall panel, fingers dancing over switches. "I just restored a small piece of it." "What about Rook?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Her chest tightened. "I haven't seen him, but I know where the K9s are held. It's off-grid, not on the official blueprints." He paused. "We have 1 hour. Then the system resets, and both of us will be locked out for good." Kayla nodded. Not even a moment's hesitation. They moved past 3 security doors, 2 corridors, and a massive coolant chamber, each lock disengaged with a simple scan of Grant's palm. "How many access strings did you hide in this place?" Kayla asked, breathless, half in awe, half in disbelief. "I didn't need many," Grant replied. "Just the right ones." Finally, they reached the outbound transport bay. A battered military truck sat under the canopy. No plates, no tags, just waiting. "Still remember how to drive?" Grant asked, tossing her the keys. Kayla caught them. Didn't answer. She looked back toward the black silhouette of the tower where she had lived like a ghost for nearly half a year. "One more thing," Grant said as she climbed into the cab. "That hard drive you sent me, I got it back. Decrypted some of it." She turned, eyes sharp. "And?" "You're going to want to see it, but not yet." He stepped back. "Find Rook first." Kayla gripped the wheel, and in her eyes the fire burned brighter than ever. This time, she wasn't alone. This time, she was taking everything back. The military truck rolled through the night. On a wet forest road, streaks of mud slid beneath the dim headlights. Wind slapped across the windshield. Branches scraped the side like lashes. But Kayla didn't blink. She couldn't afford to lose focus, not with only one wall left between her and Rook. Grant sat in the back, laptop open on his knees. "We've got 4 minutes to get past the gate before the tower swings the cameras back." "Just like old times," Kayla replied, eyes locked on the road. "Only difference is, no one's giving the orders now." They crossed a broken checkpoint, once a storage site for bioresponse gear. Now it bore a new name, Animal Class B Biohazard Quarantine Station. But everyone in the system knew what it really was, the place where they disposed of K9S no longer deemed useful. Rook was in there. The main gate required a 7-digit code. Grant had already breached it. Kayla switched off the lights, drove into the dark, one hand on the wheel, the other clutching the Glock she'd taken from the tech depot. The yard was dead quiet. On the left stood rows of makeshift steel housing. On the right, the screening center has warm yellow light spilling from its windows, casting ghostly reflections on the moss-slick concrete. Grant pointed toward the back building. "Block D, room 04. You've got 2 minutes of blind camera time. Go." Kayla flung the door open, tore across the lot like a bullet. Her boots pounded the cold cement. Her heart thudded in her chest, not from fear, but from knowing. Just a few seconds too late, and she might lose him forever. The door to room 04 was ajar. She pushed gently. And there was Rook. He lay curled on the steel floor, that once sleek black coat now streaked with IV fluids, fur shaved along his neck, eyes closed, but his chest still rose and fell. "Rook," she whispered, one ear twitching. An eyelid fluttered. And then no barking, no flailing, just those eyes, deep, heavy, shimmering with water, staring up as if asking, "You really came back?" She dropped to her knees. Her trembling hand cradled his head. "It's okay, old friend," she murmured. "We're going home." A hiss tore the silence behind her. A guard, not part of the plan, opened the supply room. His flashlight flared across her body. "Hands up!" he barked. Kayla didn't wait. She rolled left, dragging Rook with her. 2 gunshots cracked the air. One skimmed her shoulder, searing like fire. She drew her Glock, fired from the floor, one shot straight to the guard's knee. He collapsed, screaming. "Grant, bring the truck now!" she yelled into the radio. Tires screeched in the yard. Kayla lifted Rook onto her back, clutching him like a child. She ran sprinting down the corridor, heartbeat racing against sirens that began to wail across the compound. The doors flew open. Grant pounded the side of the truck. "Move!" She jumped into the back, lowering Rook onto the cushions. Blood dripped from her shoulder onto his fur, mingling with tears. "You're safe now, Rook. We made it." The engine roared. Wheels spun. The back gate slammed shut. And just like that, beneath the thick black canopy of forest, Kayla and Rook slipped once more from the jaws of death. But this time, they weren't running to hide. They were running to strike back. The tires hadn't even cooled when Kayla jumped down at the perimeter fence. Rook followed, still groggy, staggering slightly, but those eyes, sharp, alert, gleaming with the predator instinct of a warrior forged in fire. "Grant, head to the fallback point," Kayla ordered, already turning away. "No goodbye. No glance back. Just 2 shadows, a woman and dog vanishing into the forest mist. Oregon's night air was thick with fog. Towering pine trees stood like silent walls. Moisture clung to Kayla's hair and Rook's dark coat. They crossed a wet ridge, following a barely visible trail, the kind only veterans remembered, where grass grew thin from years of heavy boots and steel tires. Rotor blades thundered from the north. Kayla, frozen, looked up. A searchlight swept across the canopy, gold beams cutting the air, Wind from the blades scattered dry leaves into her face like stinging grit. "Low and off the trail," she whispered. Rook understood. They veered down into a narrow ravine, sliding along the banks of a dried stream, a place no thermal scanner could track. The chopper roared overhead. Kayla dropped flat, body shielding Rook, both of them still, breathless, mud-streaked silhouettes pressed against the earth. She closed her eyes, breathed through her nose, listened to each beat of the rotor, each shift of the engines, until it faded into the silence. The chopper didn't find them. They were free, but not safe. Not yet. Dawn crept in. Gray mist rolled across the valley, up the slopes. Rook breathed heavier. The sedative still lingered. Kayla knelt beside him, running a hand down his spine, feeling every tremble beneath the soaked fur. "We need shelter, at least until sunrise." She remembered a place, Echo Point, an abandoned ranger post once used for emergency resupply, hidden deep in the forest, 3 kilometers from the main road, inactive but still roofed and powered by solar lamps. Kayla slung her pack over her shoulder, laid a hand gently on Rook's neck. "Come on, old man. One more time." And so they moved, past fallen trees, through swamps of cold, dark mud. Rain began to fall, tiny needles stabbing skin and fur alike. No words were spoken. Only the sound of wet leaves crushed underfoot, ragged breaths, and a silent vow whispered into the wind. "This time we won't just survive. We'll expose every name that turned us into monsters." Kayla and Rook reached Echo Point just before sunrise, while the mist still clung to rusted metal towers like ghosts refusing to let go. The door creaked open without a sound. The old outpost was barely wider than 2 single beds, but its arched roof and faded weather map pinned to the wall made it a perfect hideout, at least for a few hours. Kayla shut the door, slammed the bolt, lifted a wooden floor panel, and checked beneath. Rook curled into the corner, head resting on the backpack, eyes half open, alert, even in rest. She checked the Glock, replaced the locator battery, drew a small blade. Her hands trembled from cold and exhaustion. This world didn't give anyone time to breathe. Grant had warned her once. Every escape costs data. If they catch you again, don't let them have both you and the driver. Kayla understood that more than anyone. She sank onto the bench, unlaced her boots, peeled off her mud-streaked jacket. But the moment she rolled up the sleeve, she froze. A red dot. Tiny. Barely visible unless you'd spent time disarming biotracers. She brought her wrist to her eye. Yes, it was real. A nano-sized tracker of the kind stitched into thread seams or beneath uniform labels. They'd marked her. Kayla stood abruptly, slammed her fist against the station door, not in panic, in fury. No one had said a word when she checked out that jacket from the gear depot. And in that moment, they'd planted a bloodhound on every step she took. She ripped the jacket off, slashed open the lining with the blade, found 2 more wafer-thin chips, one beneath a button, one sewn into the shoulder pad. Rook watched her, softly whimpering. "It's okay," she exhaled. "They know we ran, but they never expected we'd know how to disappear for real." She dumped the trackers into a tin can, poured fuel, lit a match. The flame flared weak, but enough to devour every signal. Then Kayla turned to the faded weather map, took a scorched pencil stub, circled a dot in the northwest. Dry Creek, an old military relay point, once the hub for NATO's Western satellite links, now decommissioned. But if even a fragment of its terminal core remained, she could decrypt the drive there. Kayla glanced over at Rook. "Get some rest. We've got 6 hours. After that..." Her gaze landed on the cracked window pane. "We hunt." And as sunlight crept over the treetops, casting orange across the rusted tin roof of Echo Point, Kayla Monroe knew one thing with absolute clarity. They thought they'd caught her, but what they'd really done was released into the wild. What Kayla didn't know, though, was that someone who had scented the wolf long before that fire lit the sky over the station. They called him Sable. No record, no rank, no fingerprints, no flag. Just a single designation. The one who cleans up what the military doesn't want to touch. He wasn't coming to capture Kayla. He didn't want the hard drive. He only wanted Rook. And the moment Kayla's transport truck left that military bay, another shadow pulled into motion behind it. No lights, no pings. Covered in Israeli thermal stealth tech, a system never approved for use on American soil. Sable didn't need warrants. He didn't need justifications. He only needed a target. And Rook was it. That afternoon, just as Kayla poured water into a tin bowl for Rook, a subtle thump whispered across the station roof. So faint it could have been wind. But Rook lifted his head instantly. Kayla frozen. "Something's wrong!" Rook stepped away from the bowl, moved to the window. No barking, just a low growl, the kind that came from deep canine training, the kind reserved for real threats. Kayla drew her Glock, stepped slowly toward the back door. Nothing outside, but her chest screamed with instinct. Then a bullet slammed into the wood panel an inch from her skull. No echo, just the sound of a suppressed sniper round. She dove right, rolled behind a steel desk. Rook followed, teeth bared, a guttural snarl rising from his chest. A figure appeared beyond the wire fence black cloak, steel mask hiding every inch of his face. He didn't break in, didn't charge. He simply watched. Rook exploded into motion, but only made it 3 steps before a high-pitched frequency pierced the air. Rock frozen. His body twitched. "A neural override device? K9 frequency lock?" Kayla whispered, barely believing her own words. "That's illegal, even in biowarfare." The man didn't speak. He moved one slow step at a time, like a predator who had already won. He knew his prey had been dragged out of its instincts, stripped of its fire. Kayla lunged sideways, aimed low, and fired. The bullet hissed through the fog a perfect line, but stopped inches short of impact. The man wore composite armor, a grade she'd never seen before. Shot, he paused. Turned his head. For the first time, the eyes behind the mask looked straight at her, not with rage, not with fear, just assessment? Then he walked away. No attack, no capture, just a message. "I know it's here. Next time, no warning." Kayla dropped to her knees beside Rook. He trembled, then slowly began to stir. The signal had been a temporary warning, not full control. She pressed a hand to his chest, felt his heart still pounding strong, unyielding. "It's not just the military now," she whispered. "Something darker is in this with us." And as she looked to the woods, where the black shadow had vanished, she knew. This wasn't just about exposing betrayal anymore. It was about facing a force darker than war itself. Kayla didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. She rebuilt the old perimeter at Echo Point twisted wire, rusted cans strung with bells, laid out in concentric rings like she used to in Afghanistan. Rook recovered slowly, but never left his post by the door, ears tuned to every shift of the wind. Kayla knew Sable would return, and next time, he wouldn't wait outside the fence. She prepped traps, smoke grenades, a folding blade duct-taped under the bench. Grant messaged her. First data fragment decrypted. Full decryption requires the Dry Creek Relay Terminal. She replied with 2 words. I'm ghost hunting. Night 3. The moon rose late. Fog oozed through the pines like liquid glass. Kayla sat by a small fire pit knife in hand, Glock at her back. Rook whimpered, lifted his head. Eyes locked on the door. The wind changed. One bell dropped, not from the wind. Kyla shot to her feet. The door remained shut. But behind the wooden wall, a soft click. The ventilation grate had shifted. Kayla didn't wait. She rolled, blade ready, but the space was empty. Then a shadow dropped from above. Sable. Combat gear black as coal. New mask covering down to his throat. No sound. No heat. Just a blade slicing air beside her face. She rolled back. The knife tore through her sleeve. Kayla kicked and struck his thigh. But Sable didn't flinch. He slammed her into the wall. Rook growled. Charged. But this time Sable came prepared. A faint whir escaped his belt. A mobile disruption field. Rook faltered mid-air, collapsed hard. He snarled, teeth bared, but couldn't move forward. Sable turned. One hand gripped Kyla's throat, pinning her to the wooden planks. His eyes, behind the mask, were steel. I don't need you, he rasped. Just the dog. Kayla fought, reached for her blade. Dropped. Reached for her gun. Blocked. He raised his knife, aiming not to kill, but to cripple. And at that moment, Rook let out a roar. Not a bark, not a whine, a roar pulled from the lungs of a wolf king. Sable turned just in time to see the gleam of golden eyes in the dark. Rook lunged. Not for the limbs, not for the arm, for the throat. He struck with surgical fury, jaws crushing the seam between armor and neck, where no vest could reach. Sable screamed. The blade fell. Blood sprayed under moonlight like a slashed ribbon. Kyla dropped to her knees. But she didn't retreat. She picked up her Glock and didn't fire. She stepped closer. So Rook would know. I'm here. I'm not leaving you this time. Rook, hold on. Until Sable stopped moving. Slumped, unconscious, not dead. But beaten. Kayla pulled Rook back, both hands cradling his head. Her eyes welled red. It's okay. It's okay. One more night survived. But this time, it wasn't survival. It was a declaration of war. Kayla left Echo Point before dawn. She didn't wait for Grant's update, didn't double-check her escape routes. She only knew one thing. If she stayed, others would come. After Sable, there would be more, and next time, it wouldn't be just one. The high-altitude wind slapped her face raw. The sky turned a sullen shade of lead. To the west, the forest sloped into snow-laced cliffs, terrain she once camped in years ago. Somewhere between 2 jagged stone walls was a narrow cave, the locals called Bear's Mouth. It was a place for those with nowhere else to go. She had no other choice. It took over 5 hours to get there. Rook stayed by her side, sometimes scouting ahead, sometimes nudging her shoulder with his nose to keep her moving. Kyla could no longer feel the earth under her boots. Her body burned from within, while the cold bit to the bone. The slash from Sable had swollen, pulsing red and angry. Halfway up the ridge, she collapsed. She didn't pass out, didn't lose consciousness. Her body simply quit. She dropped to her knees in the snow, vision swimming, cold sweat clinging to her spine. Rook stopped, circled behind her, gripped the strap of her pack in his teeth, and pulled toward the cave. She remembered saying something. Maybe it was, "Don't let me die out here." Maybe just a breath. When Kayla opened her eyes again, it was night. Wind howled through the rocks outside, but the deeper cave stayed still. She lay curled on a bed of dry moss, and wrapped around her like a second skin was Rook. His massive body shielded her from the cold. His head rested on her thigh, eyes half-lidded but vigilant. The temperature had dropped near -10. She didn't shiver. She just breathed, labored, but alive. Rook raised his head when her eyes fluttered open. He didn't bark, didn't lick her. He just looked, as if asking, "Are you still here with me?" Her hand moved slowly, rested between his eyes. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I'm still here." Rook pressed closer. A soft whine left his throat warm, low, like snowfall at night. The world could hunt them. The past could disown them. But here, buried in the heart of the mountain, two creatures held each other back from vanishing. And sometimes, a battle doesn't begin with bullets. It begins with a breath that refuses to stop. In the cave's still darkness, Kayla drifted not awake, not asleep. Her heartbeat slowed. The fever burned low and steady, coiling through her bloodstream like a slow fire, eating her from within. Then, memories came. Old, grainy like scratched film reels. Yemen. 8 years ago. They were deep in the Hadramaut border zone, where sand turned gray and the wind cut like a blade. Rapid Response Team 7 was tasked with raiding a weapons post near the Al-Mara Ridge. The order came fast. No time for recon, no satellite imagery, just a crude hand-drawn map and a rumor. A truck carrying uranium warheads had slipped in from Syria. Kayla led the second team. Rook, barely 3 years old, was then assigned to her due to an urgent personnel shuffle. They reached the target at 2:43 a.m. night vision off. Every step wager with death. She remembered signaling a stop when she noticed the sand ahead was unusually raised, and her instincts screamed. She crouched low, exhaled slowly, and turned her hand a silent warning. Possible mine. But a young soldier behind her didn't see it. He stepped forward. Boot landed on the exact spot. No time to yell. Kayla surged up to pull him back, but Rook lunged first, not at the soldier, at the sand. He landed directly atop the suspected spot, teeth locking onto a wire buried in the sand. Then he stopped moving. The whole team froze. Kayla couldn't breathe. Sand still trickled from Rook's vest like the final grains in an hourglass. Seconds passed like lifetimes. Then, no explosion. Rook remained still. Didn't flinch, only turned his head slowly, his eyes saying, "You don't die today, I won't let you." Later, EOD confirmed a dual trigger explosive. Had Kayla touched it, it would have gone off instantly. After that night, no one called him Unit Dog again. He was Rook Kayla's partner. In the post-op report, Kayla wrote only one line. "If I survived, it's because of Rook." Kayla woke from the memory. Her body is still hot, but her eyes were clear. Rook lay curled at her thigh, head still resting there as if afraid she'd vanish again. She laid her hand on his back. "It's not over," she whispered, "but this time, I'll save you." Wind howled sharper outside, but inside the cave one thing held steady. Trust. Kayla pushed herself up. Her spine ached like misaligned gears, but her mind was focused. She grabbed the medkit, popped a fever reducer, swallowed dry. Her bones felt like they'd been taken apart and put back wrong, but she refused to stay down. It was time to leave the cave. Time to do the one thing the government feared most. Rook stretched, legs unsteady then. Growled, barked once, not a threat, bark a signal. Someone approaching, not necessarily an enemy. Kyla snapped upright, snatched her Glock. Eyes locked on the narrow eastern crevice. Outside, snow fell thick and slow. The air was still. Then, a figure emerged. Gray beanie, worn military coat, leather satchel hanging heavy, footsteps light, like someone trained to leave no trace. Grant. She didn't breathe, didn't believe her eyes. How had he found her? How had he crossed uncharted woods? But then, Rook ran to him, didn't growl, didn't block the path, just leapt and touched his nose to Grant's hand. Kayla stood frozen, vision blurring for the first time in days, not from fever. Grant entered the cave. His eyes met hers, the gaze of a man who once swore never to let the system erase his friends. "You look like hell," he said, dropping the bag. "But not dead. I figured—" Kayla didn't smile, but her voice was steady. "How did you find me?" "I followed blood, fire, and a little encrypted map trick you left on the terrain charts. Not bad." He pulled out a matte black hard drive. "This is it. The recording the day Vanhurst ordered the Crimson Ridge purge. His voice, his biometric signature, and—" Grant looked up, locked eyes with her. "Proof he sold weapons intel to a private corporation linked to terrorist cells in Mali." Kayla closed her eyes. Not from pain, but because the rage inside her had just been given a name. "How long do we have?" she asked. Grant let out a dry chuckle. "Not long, but long enough to expose him. If we reach Dry Creek within 36 hours before the auto-wipe kicks in." Kayla rose to her feet. At the cave's mouth, Rook was already waiting as if he understood every word. She swung the pack over her shoulder. "Let's move," she said. "Now it's my turn to speak." The path to Dry Creek was nothing but a string of eroded ridgelines and old military trails, scars from the Cold War, now faded and ghost-gray, like memories no one dared to resurrect. Grant led. Rook stayed between them. Kayla followed, quiet. Not a single word was spoken for the first 2 hours. Only the whisper of wind and the soft scrape of boots over frost-hardened ground. When they stopped beneath a natural stone arch, Grant finally broke the silence. "Have you ever heard of an op called Ghost Falcon?" Kayla narrowed her eyes. "Number and I've read nearly every file in the Delta classification tier." "Exactly," Grant said softly, "because it's not in the system." He sat down, pulled a small memory card from his jacket, and handed it to her. "This holds a summary, pulled from an internal node at Fort Linsdale, data never uploaded to DoD servers. And the reason—" he locked eyes with Kyla, "is because 7 people had to die to make sure it never would be." Kayla dropped beside him, tension crawling up her spine. Wind howled across the rock walls. Rook laid his head on her knee, ears perked, listening like a soldier. "Ghost Falcon," Grant began, "was the code name for an op on the Bolivia-Colombia border, 3 years ago. Official objective: dismantle an illegal chemical weapons site held by rebels." Kyla nodded. "Standard cover story. Heard it before." Grant shook his head. "That was just the packaging." He unrolled a worn map and pointed to a remote green patch. "In truth, Ghost Falcon was a purge. A young officer group, including a lieutenant named Robert Kells, the senator's younger brother, stumbled onto a money trail. Black budget cash funneled into shell companies across Central America. They filed an internal report. Grant's voice dropped to a blade's edge. 3 weeks later, they vanished. Kayla felt her breath snag. You mean... They were reassigned to Ghost Falcon, labeled as a forward recon team. But when their chopper landed, the coordinates had been changed. Another unit was ordered to fire on them. Mistaken target, protocol. A chill slithered down Kyla's spine. Not the wind. Something colder. She knew about that kind of battlefield accident. She'd been trained to never question it. Derek signed off, Grant continued. Final authorization. His initials are on the red level encryption memo. I cracked it. That's why he erased the files, deleted the voices, buried the name Ghost Falcon in silence. Kayla clenched her fists. And me? She asked. Where do I fit? You didn't, but your Crimson Ridge report included data fragments one matched a scrubbed Ghost Falcon log. That was enough. Grant signed. To make you a variable they couldn't control. Rook let out a low growl. Kayla didn't speak. She just stared at the memory card as if it were the last bullet in a war no one dared to fire. Dry Creek, she whispered. We go in. And if this is real, this isn't about one betrayed unit anymore. She stood, eyes fixed on the snowy base of the mountain where the last light of day kissed the frozen ridge. This is testimony for the 7 who died without names, and for anyone who's ever been erased from history. Dry Creek, a decommissioned data relay post, lay 3 hours up the mountain. Once a NATO satellite handoff site, it was shut down during the 2014 military budget cuts. Permanently deactivated, the files said. But a few knew. One isolated node inside still hummed, disconnected but not dismantled. Grant was one of them. By the time they arrived, night had fallen. Snow drifted in silence. Rook moved first, clearing corners with surgical precision. The steel door was ajar, a sign someone had been there recently. Grant pulled a lock knife, slipped through the gap, and the 3 ghosts disappeared into the dark. The data room was deep underground. They crept down a rusted staircase that cried out in metal groans. In the pitch black, Kayla still heard Rook's breathing steady, alert. The core was locked in an old Orion X drone hard case. Grant used a legacy override code. It took 10 minutes. When the lock clicked, Kayla held her breath. Inside, a heavy drive. Military grade. Grant plugged it into a converter. The screen lit up. Folders lined up in rows, but one blinks red. OpGF Phoenix/asset drone. 7 classified, eyes only, DV. Kayla looked at Grant. DV Derek Van Hurst? He nodded. This is what he never wanted anyone to see. They tried a low-tier decryption code. Access denied. Grant switched tactics, launching a custom attack script, code he'd written back when he was still building the Pentagon's security protocols. 3 minutes, then static, and finally, video. Kyla stared. Rook laid down beside her again, head across her foot, grounding her to reality. The footage was from a drone, flying low over jungle terrain in Bolivia's border zone. Under the tree canopy, 7 soldiers, 4 men, 3 women, light tactical gear, no rank insignias, but Kayla spotted it on the shoulder patch of the Special Liaison Unit, the same one Robert Kells once wore. One of them typed into a laptop, another smiled and waved at the drone. They knew they were being watched. They believed they were safe. The video cut to a new scene. Time had passed. The next frame showed a man not in uniform standing beside a signal relay monitor. His face remained in shadow, but the voice, unmistakable. All witnesses must be eliminated before the Crimson team reaches the next site. Clear. Derek's voice, cold, clipped, no inflection, no doubt. Someone off-camera asked, "Should we preserve the satellite feed?" Derek paused, then nodded. "Keep it, but encrypt it. I want everything to be able to disappear after 90 days. Kayla didn't blink. Her eyes locked on the screen. Her lips trembled not from cold, but from fury tightening like a noose around her throat. "Is this enough?" she asked. Grant's voice dropped. "He'll say it's fake. He'll scream deep fake, but—" He pointed at the voice print. "The frequency, throat vibration, speech cadence, no AI can mimic that. And we've got his encryption signature embedded." Kayla gave a slow nod. "Then we're not just being hunted anymore." She looked at the screen, her voice quiet but hard. "We're the last witnesses." They left Dry Creek before full nightfall. Snow floated in the air like falling ash. Rook led the way, ears high, scanning the white silence. Grant carried the drive. Kayla held the gun. Not a word was spoken, but Kayla's thoughts roared. The footage, the voice, the signature, a fuse waiting for fire. She turned to Grant. "When we're back at camp, what's your first move?" "Send the file to 3 places, 1 to the press, 1 to a contact in the Internal Oversight Committee, and the last to the wife of one of the 7 who vanished." He gave a faint smile, the kind people wear when they know they've passed the point of no return. "And you?" he asked. Kyla opened her mouth, but the world shattered. Crack! A sharp, dry gunshot ripped through the air. Grant staggered. A bloom of red spread across his coat, and he fell. No sound, no warning. Kayla lunged before thought could even catch up. "Grant!" she screamed, but it echoed uselessly through the snow. No pulse, no movement. His eyes were wide open, still locked on justice, even in death. Kyla raised her head. Rook had already begun to growl, teeth bared, his gaze locked upslope. Across the ridge, a silhouette, the glint of a scope in moonlight. A sniper. Not a threat, not a warning. A decision, an execution. There was no time. Kyla ripped the hard drive from Grant's lifeless hand and shoved it against her chest. "Run, Rook!" she screamed. "Now!" And they ran. Through snow, through wind, through a whiteout world where direction no longer mattered. Kayla didn't look back. She couldn't. Because if she did, she would fall. She would see his face one last time, the only man who believed her when the world called her a ghost. Rook stayed close to a silent shadow carrying the spirit of every soul who had died to keep her alive. Another bullet split the air, slamming into a tree inches from her head. Rook veered left. Kayla followed. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just clutched the drive to her chest like it was a heartbeat, the heartbeat of truth. Ahead, only darkness. But now, Kayla understood something. It's the darkness that makes the light undeniable. Kayla and Rook ran through the night. No stopping, no looking back. By the time they reached the western edge of the Cascade Range, the snow had thinned. The wind had softened, but the ache of loss sliced into every step. Kayla carried Grant's death like a flame not to keep warm, but to burn every lie to ash. She needed one person. Just one. Someone who could turn the truth into a weapon. That someone lived in an abandoned house at the edge of the Eugene Woods. Nora Helix, the blind hacker, a former intelligence signal analyst, forced into retirement after she accidentally erased 4 terabytes of unclassified but critical NATO server data. She was the only person who laughed when the FBI raided her house and found nothing because Nora didn't use a keyboard. She listened to systems. She touched data through auditory memory. Kyla approached the house with no lights, no number, no doorbell. Just a black cat curled in a shattered windowsill. Rook gave a soft growl. The door creaked open before Kayla could knock. "I heard you breathing the moment you stepped into the woods," said a woman's voice, clear, flat, and sharp as a laser beam. "I may be blind, Monroe, but not to sound." Kayla exhaled. "You remember me?" "Hard to forget the woman who dragged me out of a burning convoy in Syria, huh?" Nora stepped out, eyes clouded like frosted glass, her braided hair tangled like an Ethernet jungle. She wore an old hoodie and held a steaming mug of coffee, even though it was only 4:32 a.m. They sat in the basement surrounded by devices even the NSA wouldn't have language for. No screens, no mouse, just a vibrating touchpad, wave pulse transmitter, and a frequency-reading feedback system that spoke to the fingertips like Braille for machines. Kyla placed the hard drive on the table. Nora reached for it, ran her fingers across, nodded. "Drone grade, heavy duty. You kept the encryption route?" "No," Kayla replied. "I've got the decrypted copy, but I need you to push it to 3 targets, 1 to the press, 1 to an anonymous server, and 1 special." "What's special?" "The widow of one of the 7 from Ghost Falcon." Nora paused, then looked up, not seeing, but cutting through the silence like she saw every unspoken truth behind it. "Then I'll make sure the whole damn world hears what they tried to bury." She activated the system. A low electric hum pulsed through the room like the heartbeat of a machine waking from hibernation. "I'll use reverse signal encoding. Push the data in binary fragments across civilian broadcast waves, news blurbs, weather pings, even a test-run jazz signal on frequency 119.3. But we've only got 3 minutes before the reverb ping gives our position away." "3 minutes is enough," Kayla said. "And what about you?" Nora smiled. "I may be blind, but if I die, I'll die fighting the one thing I hate more than darkness lies." Outside, Rook gave a low bark, a signal. Something was approaching. Kyla looked at Nora. "Start it," she said. "We don't need light to see the way. We'll make the dark see us." The signal launched. 3 encrypted streams, fired like silent missiles through civilian noise, slipped into weather updates, looped jazz broadcasts, and low-band radio chatter. Nora stayed still, hands on the vibration board, like a blind musician coaxing rhythm out of airwaves. Rook fell silent again, but his ears twitched toward the west. Something was moving, or waiting. "It's done," Nora whispered. "All 3 delivered." Kayla clenched her fists. "Then it's time for the final cut." Site 7K, on paper, just a decommissioned auxiliary armory outside Elk Ridge Base. In reality, a vault for physical evidence that couldn't be digitized, handwritten maps, unrecovered drone drives, prototype weapons off the books, and above all, unfiled records from Ghost Falcon. That night they moved. Kyla at point, Rook a silent shadow beneath a silver moon, Nora back at base, building backup exfil routes, ready to push a signal burst if the mission blew open. Grant was gone. But the conspiracy had to fall, and the truth, no matter the cost, had to rise. Site 7K hid beneath a cliff face. The entrance is an old mechanical vault door. No biometrics, no digital lock. Kayla almost smiled. The more analog, the easier to break. She used a compression clamp, snapped the lock in 7 seconds. The door creaked open. A wave of rust, damp steel, and aged gunpowder hit her like a memory. She raised her Glock, silenced, stepped in. Rook beside her silent, no growl, no bark, only the steady breath of absolute loyalty. In the third room, behind 2 reinforced blast walls, Kola found it. Evidence Vault B4. On an old wooden shelf, thick with dust, sat a small safe. Etched on the front were the letters GF-PHX, Ops Only. Kayla keyed in the code Grant had once scribbled into his old leather notebook. 1127-Atlas. The lock clicked open. Inside, a black drive, a folded map, and a weathered handwritten page. 7 names, all recorded wrong, all erased from the official KIA list. Kayla inhaled deeply. Her eyes no longer wavered. The next second, the ceiling lights blazed on. The power system had reactivated. A cold, mechanical voice echoed through the intercom. "Intruder detected at .7K, initiating facility lockdown, rapid response unit inbound." She had just enough time to grab the drive and shove it into her jacket. Rook growled low, signaling 3 men closing in from a side corridor. Kayla sprinted toward the emergency exit in the back, firing a single round to destroy the ceiling cam. She wasn't hiding anymore. The truth had spoken. Behind her, red lights blinked violently. Sirens screamed like a dying machine's last breath. Ahead, Rook led the way, a warrior carrying the final flame. Kayla never looked back. She knew. From now on, this wasn't an escape. It was the beginning of a counterattack. Hallway B stretched 60 meters, narrow, diamond soys built to kill anyone who didn't belong, steel-lined walls, no side exists. One end, the data core. The other, 3 guards advancing with tactical flash strobes, blinding bursts that scattered aim and disrupted sight. Kayla fell back behind a steel column. Rook let out a low growl. "Wait for my signal," she whispered. Footsteps, heavy, flashes, white and disorienting. One of the guards crept past the data room threshold. Kayla leaned out and fired twice. One shot hit the shoulder. The second tore into his leg. He dropped like dead weight. The other 2 reacted instantly, unleashing fire toward the source. Kayla rolled sideways, diving toward the data door. She fumbled for Grant's access card, swiping it toward the panel. But before the scanner could blink, bang! A single shot cracked from the opposite corridor, dead on, headed straight for her chest, and in a split second, a black blur leapt from the shadows. "Rook!" Her scream shattered the hallway's tension. The shot tore through the air, then the sound of flesh slamming into steel. Rook's body flipped backward, a splash of blood arcing across the steel wall like a crimson crescent. He collapsed at Kayla's feet. "No!" She screamed, a raw, primal cry swallowed by the howling alarm. She didn't think so. Didn't aim. Kayla fired 3 rounds in blind fury. 2 of the guards dropped instantly. She dropped to her knees, hands cupping Rook's body, his blood hot and flooding her palms. Rook's eyes were barely open, breathing shallow, but still alive. "No, no. You weren't supposed to take that for me." Her voice cracked. Rook whimpered softly, not in pain, but as if apologizing. Number not an apology, a vow. "I'm not gone." Kayla tore her sleeve, packed the wound with cloth, pressing with shaking hands. "Hold on. Please, Rook. Please don't go." She leaned her forehead against his, feeling the faint warmth, the loyalty still pulsing beneath fur and muscle, but fading. The red light pulsed overhead. On the wall behind them, Rook's blood left a diagonal slash, not just a wound. A mark, a symbol of sacrifice. Kayla cried out again, not in fear, but because in that moment she understood. What the system feared most was loyalty they could never buy. She lifted Rook into her arms. "We didn't come here to die," she said. "We came here to survive, and to bring down the ones who buried them all." Rook didn't bark, but his eyes flickered once more. A signal, a promise. "Keep going. I'm still here." Kayla found a shadowed alcove in an auxiliary hallway in an old fire corridor near the tech room. She laid Rook down gently, his back against the cold steel wall. Her hands were trembling, but she managed to pull the last clean cloth from her jacket pocket. The bullet was lodged deep in Rook's side, dangerously close to the lung. The bleeding was heavy, thick, hot. She took out her knife and sliced the cloth into long strips, wrapping them tight around Rook's torso like a field dressing on a battlefield. Firm, but not too tight, just enough to hold. Still, blood soaked through after the second pass. "No, you can't lose more." Her voice cracked. Rook gasped. Each breath is shallow, like wind trying to slip through a door slowly closing. Kyla pressed her hand to his neck, the same spot she always touched during training. There was still a pulse. Weak, but steady. She bent close to his ear. "You're alive. You're still here. I'm not letting you die in this place." A tear rolled from her cheek onto Rook's black fur, vanishing into the dense coat like it had never been. But Rock felt it. He tilted his head not from pain, but like he was trying to comfort her instead. Kayla laughed through her tears. "Damn it. Even now, you won't let me fall apart." She tightened the bandage one last time, then draped her jacket over him. "Stay warm. I'll be back. I just need—" She looked around. A terminal, a broadcast system, something that can send a signal. Grant's words echoed in her mind. "There's an old signal room in the sublevel. Not on the grid. Uncontrolled. But if you get there, the world will hear you." Kayla grabbed her Glock and stood up. Air whistled through the ceiling vent. The alarm was fading, or maybe her brain was tuning out everything that didn't matter anymore. Only two things did. Rook waiting. And the truth is buried under a century of silence. Before leaving, she turned back to Rook one last time. His eyes were half shut. His chest is still rising and falling. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't wait for me. She just bent down, pressed her forehead to his, and walked away, towards the stairwell that led to the signal room. Every step felt like she was carrying the souls of the forgotten. Sublevel 3. Once a Cold War emergency broadcast station for Western Oregon. Most of it dismantled, except for one mini relay still linked to a low-tier military satellite, active only in emergencies. Kayla forced the door with a pair of cuffs. Dust and smoke burst out. She coughed hard, but didn't stop. Inside a control board, ancient but blinking, green LED, manual input, no biometric scan, no voice ID. Too old to be hacked, but just smart enough to scream. She plugged in the drive. The screen blinked to life. Data detected, Ghost Falcon Ops Archive Class 10. Authentication required. Kyla entered 3 strings of code. Each keystroke felt like a memory of Grant, the nameless 7, herself before betrayal. Prompt: transmit to international satellite? She hit yes. Inside the Pentagon's operations center, a red light came alive. At Derek Van Hurst's blacklight command post, Level 4 alert triggered. Derek stepped into the room, his eyes like steel, staring at the screen where Kayla's image was streaming through an old satellite feed. "She's broadcasting," a lieutenant whispered, his voice tight with panic. "Cut the signal," Derek ordered. "We can't because it's outside internal control. She's using a satellite linked to the civilian media relay." Derek's jaw clenched. "Then blow up Site 7K now." Back underground, Kayla watched the screen. Transmitting 17%, 36%, 51%. Then footsteps upstairs. Loud, rushed, boots slamming the metal grates. The loudspeaker crackled with a grim order. "Alpha Team, proceed to Level 3. Eliminate target, no capture." Kayla drew her Glock. Her hand rested on the transmission lever. If she had to, she'd overload the system and burn it all, but not before the truth was sent. 62%. Then she heard it, not footsteps. A different sound. The hiss of chemical ignition. She looked up. A ventilation pipe overhead began to shudder, glowing from within. Derek was doing what he always did. Burn the evidence. Clean the slate. Kyla clenched her teeth. 73%. She ripped off the cooling system's safety panel, rerouted all remaining power into the transmission port. 85%. The first explosion rocked the corridor. Smoke surged down the stairwell like a black tide. 91%. She leaned into the control board, blood from her scraped arm dripping onto the keys. 94%. Glass shattered. Heat rolled in. 97%. "Come on, damn it, go!" she screamed. 99%. 100%. Data transmission complete. Satellite backup successful. Public release initiated. Everything after that was white light. A blast tore through the basement ceiling. Kayla was hurled backward out the door. She tumbled down the hall, slammed into a wall, gasped. A shard of metal jammed into her left shoulder. Blood. Fire. Black smoke. But she smiled. Because the world had heard. No applause. No voices thanking her. Just the slow, crumbling groans of a beast dying from a bullet straight to the heart. Kyla crawled through cracked concrete, ceiling debris crashing down like rain made of shrapnel. Every movement felt like flames dancing through her nerves. Her left arm barely lifted, soaked with blood. But she didn't stop. Because at the end of the corridor, Rook was standing. He didn't bark. He didn't run to her. He just stood there, a dusty black silhouette, body trembling, blood still leaking from his side but standing. Rook turned and ran. Not away, but forward. Leading. Kyla understood instantly. She cried out half agony, half defiance, and pushed herself to her feet. Rook's footsteps echoed through the steel corridor like the last heartbeat of hope. At the far end, a twisted door. Rook slammed into it with his head. It burst open, revealing a narrow tunnel, a forgotten Cold War escape route once used by technicians. No lights, no signs, only darkness, and at the end of that darkness, life. Kayla crawled in, her arms screaming with each inch. Rook ran ahead, stopping every few feet to look back, as if to say, "Hurry, I'm not leaving you." Behind them, another explosion. The whole tunnel trembled. Flames licked through cracks. A piece of molten metal zipped past Kayla's face. She ducked just in time, kept crawling. No thought. No plan. Just one truth. If she lived, she had to live long enough to see justice rise. The light. Not from machines. Real light. Forest light. Rook burst out first. He collapsed on the grass, panting but alive. Kyla followed, her body smeared with soot and blood, knees torn, her left hand numb. But when she placed it on Rook's chest, she felt a heartbeat faint, but real. Behind them, Site 7K burned. A plume of black smoke spiraled into the sky like a monstrous serpent. A helicopter roared in the distance, but too late. They were out of range now. Kayla lay back on the earth, her chest rising and falling, heart thundering, but still beating. And Rook was still beside her. In that breathless silence beneath the trees, there were only two sounds. One from a woman, one from a dog. No longer a soldier and K9, no longer fugitive and companion, but the last two survivors of a truth the world tried to bury. 6:37 a.m. Eastern Time. Across millions of TV screens, a flickering image began to play. No logo, no anchor voice, just raw black and white footage, drone-captured data silently broadcast on PBS's Defense Channel. And, almost instantly, it appeared everywhere. YouTube, TikTok, Reddit, European and South American military news outlets, a sergeant shot in the back, a response team abandoned near the Colombia border, a map signed with 3 letters. DV. Within the hour, the hashtag #GhostFalcon trended #1 nationwide. CNN, NBC, BBC, Al Jazeera, NHK all interrupted their programming to run the footage with the headline, "Pentagon accused of covering up Black Ops witness killings." Veteran communities erupted. Military forums exploded. Even those loyal to the system couldn't turn away from what played on loop. The sharp breath of the fallen, the thunder of each explosion, the handwritten logs taped to the walls of B4. 10:12 a.m. The Pentagon. In a high-level emergency meeting crowded with polished shoes and gold-braided uniforms, one man was called out of the room by 3 federal inspectors. Derek Van Hurst. He stood, facing the stairs. Not a word. Just a faint nod as if he had always known this moment would come. A hand on his shoulder. "You're requested. There's a federal summons for investigation." Derek didn't flinch. He just muttered, "Took longer than I expected." Meanwhile, deep in the woods of Oregon, inside a makeshift wooden cabin, Kyla sat beside a crackling fire. Rook lay next to her, wounds still redressed daily. On a flickering laptop screen, a shaky satellite connection barely holding, she read the words, "Kayla Monroe, whistleblower behind #GhostFalcon remains missing, but the world has heard her voice." Kayla smiled. Not out of joy, but because, for once, someone finally said her name. Right. She typed a single message into the dark net, then hit send. "I'm not a rebel, I'm a survivor, and I chose to speak." Washington, D.C. Congressional Hearing, Federal Oversight Committee. No one thought she would show. Reporters packed the hallway, unsure whether the woman the press had dubbed the ghost of #GhostFalcon would ever step into the light. 10:13 a.m. A side door opened. No bodyguards, no entourage. Just Kyla Monroe wearing a plain black shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, faded cuff scars still visible on her wrists. And behind her Rook, walking slow, bandaged, but eyes still glowing like it was day 1 on the battlefield. The room fell silent. The committee chair rose. "Ms. Monroe, you're not required to testify." Kyla's voice was quiet. "I've been hiding long enough?" No further questions. No oath needed. She placed a USB on the table. "I don't need to speak. Just watch this." The lights dimmed. The screen lit up. And there it was, drone footage once erased from existence reborn. An abandoned squad. A commanding officer named Van Hurst gave the order to sanitize the site. a weapons route map marked with a private contractor's seal, a designation, DF-17, the real Ghost Falcon. No one moved. No one dared breathe. At the end, a voice echoed Grant's final message. "If you're hearing this, I'm already dead, but she's still alive, and she told the truth." When the lights came back on, no one could look Kayla in the eyes, because what they'd just witnessed was unforgivable. A young congressman finally broke the silence. "What do you want?" Kayla didn't answer him. She reached down, ran a hand across Rook's back, the warrior now resting by her feet. "Not justice for me, but for the 7 names no headline ever mentioned, and for every soul who stayed loyal and got betrayed for it." Kayla left without turning back. The media erupted. People took to the streets with signs, "Justice for Ghost Falcon." And for the first time in decades, a federal investigation was launched, not to punish the whistleblower, but to take down those who silenced them. Kayla rented a tiny room on the outskirts. A worn-down place of paper-thin walls, a creaky ceiling fan, windows facing a barren lot beyond the rail tracks. Rook stayed by the door, head resting on his front paws, never letting his eyes leave her. At the small wooden table, Kayla opened an old leather-bound notebook. For the first time in years, she wrote a letter. "Dear Mom." The first words made her hand stop. She couldn't even remember the last time she'd written to her mother. Maybe before Yemen, before Ghost Falcon, before everything shattered. But she kept writing. "Mom, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you, but if anyone finds it, I want them to know something. Rook saved me, not just once, but over and over again. Amid the blood, amid the kill orders, amid the betrayals, Rook was still there, waiting for her, in a way no human ever had." Kayla paused. She took a long breath. "Grant is dead, but he never betrayed me. He was the last person who still believed not in me, but in what's right." She let the silence settle. "He once told me, some warriors don't need armor. They just need to be heard." Now he was at peace, but Kayla wasn't done. She glanced at Rook. He was still breathing steadily. One ear twitched as she turned to a new page. She wrote just one more line. "I don't want a medal. I just want forgiveness." Then she sat there, still listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the window frame. The air was musty. Dust hung in it like old regrets. But it was warm, because no one was hunting her tonight. Because, for once, she and Rook still had each other. Then, as if some inner thread had reached its limit, she quietly tore the letter into 3 pieces, dropped them into the bottom of the trash can. Not because she was afraid someone would read it, but because some truths aren't meant to be shared. Some truths are just meant to be carried so you can keep walking. Kayla stood up, walked back to the bed. She sat on the floor beside it, leaned against the wall. Rook lifted his head, then gently rested it on her lap. She stroked his fur, her voice a whisper only he could hear. "Tomorrow we keep going, not for revenge anymore, but for those who never got their chance to speak." Outside, a freight train thundered by. The steel wheels shrieked against the tracks like the sound of the world, still moving on, even though some people had stopped long ago. Washington, D.C., Arlington National Cemetery. The sunrise came slow. There was no rain, no blazing sun, just a quiet morning, as if the sky itself understood that today did not need noise. No flags flying, no ceremonial horns, no military parade, no Pentagon delegation. Only a small line of people standing in silence before a field of white headstones stretching out to the horizon. Kayla Monroe approached from the east. Her hand rested gently on the leash. Rook walked beside her. Slowly, still bandaged, but with his head held high. No cameras pointed at them. No reporters narrated the scene. And yet, every person present turned and stood. No one clapped. No one called her name. They just stood, because they knew. This woman and the dog beside her had spoken the truth a whole generation had been too afraid to voice. And they had survived, to carry its weight. Kayla stopped before a headstone that bore no name. On the stone, only 7 small etched dots like a Morse code transmission that had been cut short. It was the shared grave of the Ghost Falcon 7. No IDs, no death certificates, no endings. Kayla unlatched the leash. Rook sat beside her, unmoving. Kayla knelt down, one knee in the grass. She opened a small canvas pouch at her side. From it, she pulled out an old combat scarf stained with dried blood and a scratched, bent silver badge engraved with 3 words. Truth lives here. She laid them at the base of the stone. She didn't speak, just bowed her head. A soft wind stirred, lifting the edge of the scarf like a final salute. Beside them, a little girl held her father's hand and whispered, "Daddy, who is she?" The man wearing a faded military jacket looked at Kayla, then answered softly, someone who didn't look away. Moments later, Kayla stood. So did Rook. They didn't stay for the end, didn't join any reception, didn't pose for photos. They came to remember, and left to keep living. The gravel path led them out of Section 7. The crowd had mostly gone. Only a few old soldiers remained silent in the grass, hats at their chests, eyes fixed on the 2 figures walking slowly away. Kayla didn't turn around, because she knew if she looked back, she'd meet their eyes. The eyes of those who knew pain, who knew loss, and who were still standing. Rook walked beside her, not fast, not steady. He limped his left hind leg, still weak, each step a reminder of the firefight at Site 7K. But that gait was proud. No leash, no commands, because Rook wasn't a dog anymore. Rook was a soldier. And Kayla Monroe, once a detainee, once the Ghost Monroe whispered about on military broadcasts, was now just a traveler. A small pickup truck waited at the edge of the cemetery. Old, rusted, no license plates. Kayla opened the passenger door. Rook jumped in a little slower now, but without needing help. She slid behind the wheel, turned the key. No music played. Only the wind drifting through a half-open window and the engine rattling like a tired breath. She glanced in the rearview mirror and saw herself. No more blood, no uniform, no ID tags, just a face that had lost everything and still chose to go on. Rook closed his eyes. His head rested on the seat's edge, his mouth curled slightly, as if dreaming of the Colombian jungles where they first met. Before turning onto the highway, Kayla looked at the clock. 7:47 a.m. A new day. No orders, no missions, just a direction, no roadmap, no plan. But there was Rook, there was faith, and there was the truth now no longer buried. She pressed the gas. The truck rolled away from the cemetery, blending into traffic, into a moving America unaware that 2 survivors had just left the beating heart of history, carrying a story that everyone should remember. Southern outskirts of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Tucked beside the slope of a quiet mountain stood a modest training center. No signs, no billboards, just a patch of land fenced in with wood, a few container buildings, and a tin-roofed cabin. Locals called it the Hollow. But to those who once lost their way after war, to those who couldn't sleep through the screams in their minds, this place was sanctuary. Kayla Monroe was no longer lieutenant. She didn't give interviews. She simply taught how to read emotional signals, how to breathe in rhythm, how to walk in step with a four-legged warrior, the way Rook had once taught her. Not as a trainer, but as a soul who had once stood with her at the edge. Rook didn't run far these days. His old wound meant he could only circle the yard a few times. But no one minded. Because whenever Rook was present, PTSD veterans would pause, kneel, and let him rest his head on their arms. No words, no prescriptions. Just a touch, and that was enough. One cloudy May afternoon, Kayla carried a small rectangular stone, rough, unpolished. She placed it by the base of a pine tree in the corner of the yard, where Rook liked to lie in the late hours. Carved into the stone were the words, "Rook warrior without a medal. Friend without betrayal, no birth date, no death date." Because Rook was still here. That evening, Kayla sat on the front step, a mug of black tea in hand. Rook lay beside her, eyes half closed, ears flicking whenever the wind changed. She whispered, "Maybe one day, no one will even remember the name Ghost Falcon. Maybe no one will ever build a statue for you." Rook didn't respond, just exhaled softly a quiet agreement that maybe this was enough. In the distance, younger vets walked their dogs along the edge of the fence. They didn't know Kayla had once been erased from every database, didn't know Rook had nearly died from a soldier's bullet. They only knew that here. Someone had survived so they could keep living. And in the corner of the yard, the stone still sat. No flowers, no wreaths, just a few dog prints in the dirt and a sky that said nothing. The kind of silence that stays with you forever. Some wounds can't be seen. But they're healed by a loyal gaze, a gentle wag of the tail, and the quiet thump of a four-legged heart that's never known betrayal. German shepherds aren't just smart or strong. They're companions, they're warriors. They're the ones who stay when the whole world walks away. And in stories like Kayla and Rook's, we don't just witness a fight for survival, we see what loyalty truly means. The kind that never asks for anything back. The kind people sometimes forget how to hold on to. So love your animals. Give your respect to those silent souls who feel more than they show. Because sometimes, the thing that heals a broken human isn't a voice, but a heartbeat that waits and stays. And if this story moved you, hug your dog a little tighter tonight. Because who knows? You might be living beside a hero the world just hasn't honored yet. The February wind slipped through the cracks of the long-distance bus, carrying with it the chill of a countryside with no sea, only silence and absence. Reedsall stepped off at the final station, his worn-out military boots still dusted with soil from places no one asked about, and he never offered. One hand held a backpack, the other dragged a scuffed suitcase with a frayed handle. Reed stood still in the open courtyard of the small terminal, letting the cold soak through every thread of fabric, every vein, every unstitched memory. The old town hadn't changed much in 13 months. The narrow asphalt streets were still uneven. The wooden houses with slanted roofs remained. The street lamps still lit up earlier than needed, as if afraid of the dark staying too long. Reed walked past all of it, quiet as the shadow of his own past. There were no greetings, no cheers, only the soft crunch of wheels on pavement, the wind whistling through tree canopies, and his footsteps tapping an invisible rhythm across familiar ground. The old house sat at the edge of the neighborhood, where the sounds of cars faded, and birdsong filled the morning air. Reed stopped before the warped wooden gate. The once white fence was now peeling, revealing weathered planks like the skin of the elderly. He drew in a deep breath, hand resting on the latch. But he didn't open it. Not because it was locked, but because he hesitated. The house was silent, the glass windows fogged with dust. Weeds overtook the stone path. The wooden porch swing had lost one of its ropes and swayed gently in the wind without anyone sitting. Reed called out softly, "Mom? Dad?" Only echoes replied. No voices. He circled to the side, where the old back door used to jam every summer. When he was young, a light shoulder bump would pop it open. This time it slid open too easily, as if no one had touched it for a long, long time. Inside was a world suspended in time. Dust coated every surface. The couch still sat in its usual place, but the cushions had fallen to the floor. Crooked family photos hung on the wall. The dining table was bare. The kitchen cabinets hung half open, revealing shelves as empty as unanswered questions. Reed moved step by step, each one light yet heavy. Every corner, every muted sound, every faint shaft of light through the curtains felt like they were waiting for someone, or had long since given up waiting. He didn't know when his parents had left. No message, no email. Phone calls fell into silence. Letters went unanswered. Amid the chaos of distant deployments, Reed had believed that when he returned, everything would still be here, imperfect but intact. But it wasn't. Only the empty house remained, a name in a military file, and him. He dropped his backpack beside the doorway, then just stood there as if undecided whether to step in or turn away. Almost on instinct, he walked toward the back, past the rear door, where his mother used to tend her rose garden. Now only knee-high weeds remained, choking the paths. A torn garden net hung across the fence. The wind hissed through rotting wood. And then, a sound. Small, hoarse, broken. A whimper. Reed froze. He turned, scanning the backyard now touched by the last traces of twilight. In a shadowed corner, where the old kennel leaned between two thick trees, he saw a shape. The kennel tilted, nearly collapsed. Boards had fallen off, the pale green paint a mere ghost of its former self. And deep in the darkest corner, something moved. He clicked on the small flashlight attached to his keychain. The thin beam lit up a hunched form, a curled-up body, ribs protruding like iron rods, patches of fur long gone, leaving only rough, dirt-caked skin. A hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle, but the eyes, cloudy as they were, looked straight at him. Reed stepped forward. Slowly, as if walking toward a version of himself he had forgotten. In the trembling light, he saw the old collar around the creature's neck, rusted, cracked, but still bearing a single word. Shape. His heart stopped. Shape, the dog he had raised from the first days of enlistment. Not just a pet, a companion, the only one who shared his bed the night before deployment. The first being who curled beside him when he trembled on his first night home from the front. The one who never asked, never judged, only stayed, on time for meals, silent when needed, and present precisely when Reed no longer believed he was still human. Shape was the soul that taught him how to stay calm through panic. When the explosions in his head wouldn't stop, when darkness refused to lift, only Shape stayed, pressed beside him, still, breathing slow, watching him, watching until Reed could bear to look at himself again, without fear. The day he received new orders, Reed couldn't take Shape along. A kind neighbor had promised to care for him. Reed had believed. He had kissed Shape on the forehead and whispered, "I'll come back. Wait for me." Then he left, and now this form, that name, lay curled like a fading shadow in the corner of a forgotten yard. Reed dropped to his knees before his mind could catch up. "Shape," he whispered. Not as a call, but as if to remind himself that this was real, that memory wasn't deceiving him, that what was happening wasn't a midday nightmare. Shape lifted his head, slowly, painfully. He didn't bark, didn't whimper. He only breathed, heavy and thin, like the final wisp of smoke in a cold room. Then he moved, not with the eager spring of old times, but with the drag of sheer will, inch by inch, tremble by tremble. The rear of his body no longer responded. But still, he tried. Somehow he dragged himself forward until his dry nose touched the tip of Reed's boot. And then, with what seemed like the very last flicker of consciousness, Shape pressed his head against Reed's leg. Not to beg, not to plead, but as if to say, "I know you. I've waited, and now I'm here." His tail gave a small wag just once, then went still. Reed broke, not in tears, but in the silent, violent scream of a heart tearing open. He gathered Shape into his arms, gently as one would hold a fragile spine. The dog's breath came in fragments, his chest rising and falling in painful labor. Reed whispered, "I left you behind, but you waited. You really waited for me." Then he rose, hands trembling, eyes burning, feet running, across the overgrown yard, through the gate, down the street where no lights shone anymore. His fingers dialed emergency as he cradled Shape against his chest, like holding a memory that had never been healed. The story had never ended. It was only now beginning. In that weak, broken whimper, Reed knew something was still alive. And the only thing he could do was not let it die again. Shape lay quietly in Reed's arms like an old rag, weightless, almost without form. Under the faint beam of the flashlight, his body no longer resembled a dog, but a twisted remnant of survival, of hunger, of being forgotten. Reed knelt in the tall, tangled grass, his own breath faltering, heart clenched at the shiver that passed through Shape's frail body. That name, Shape, faded on the rusted collar, only part of the word still visible, as if time itself had tried to erase what people lacked the courage to remember. But Reed had recognized it instantly. Unmistakable, undeniable, an old collar with faded letters, now the last proof of an unfinished promise. In a world where the small things are often forgotten, that name had held a fragment of soul no one else had the strength to hold on to. Shape, no longer just the name of a dog, but a vow, a reminder, the visible form of something once spoken and never completed. Reed had given him that name on a rainy afternoon at base, when a red dust-covered puppy sat shivering inside his military jacket. In those early days of service, Reed hadn't yet adapted to the sound of commands, boots pounding, or the breathless sprints through endless drills. But when he returned to his room, a small creature was always waiting, eyes wide, ears drooping, as if the world outside held no fear, so long as something was still waiting inside. He used to dream. Not often, but just enough to remember. In those light naps between shifts, he saw a shadow passing through rooms filled with smoke. At first he thought it was a hallucination. But when he opened his eyes, the pup was there. Same spot, same shape, as if stepping out of that dream. Eventually, Reed stopped calling him Pup or Little Guy. He needed a name, not to summon him, but to acknowledge he existed. Shape, not because of how he looked, but because to Reed he was the first form of peace he could touch after drifting for so long through exhaustion and confusion. He was the shape that made the cold room meaningful, the unchanging shape in a world where everything else could disappear. The name was simple, abrupt, but carried something unspoken. Once, a fellow soldier asked, Why that weird name? Reed had only smiled. Because it was the only thing I could recognize when I couldn't recognize myself. Shape wasn't only there during the gentle moments. He existed when Reed panicked, when homesickness clawed at him, when a letter from home arrived too late, and when his mind filled only with the static of things broken beyond repair. Shape didn't soothe. He existed. And sometimes, that was all it took. One night Reed couldn't sleep. He sat curled at the edge of his bunk, the oil lamp casting long shadows. Shape crawled over, laid his chin on Reed's knee, and didn't move. Reed ran a slow hand down his back, and for the first time understood what presence without demand meant. Shape didn't need to know war, didn't need to hear the unspeakable. He just needed to be there. And somehow, that healed more than any advice ever could. Reed had once promised himself he wouldn't get attached while in the military. Everything felt too temporary, too easily lost, but he still filled out the registration form listing Shape as his companion, still took him for vaccinations, still bought that first collar, dark brown leather, hand-carved with the word Shape, crooked but honest. That collar now hung around the neck of a creature Reed had barely recognized. Rusty, worn, its letters peeling away. But all Reed needed was a trace. A faint curve of the letter S was enough to flood his mind with memories like a dam breaking. And in that moment, he understood. It wasn't time that tried to blur it. It was people who tried to forget. Shape never did. That name, like a story left untold, a chapter left unfinished, a promise never fulfilled but still believed. Because to Shape, Shape wasn't just a name. It was a signal, a sign that he belonged to someone, and he would wait until that signal was answered. But Reed had left. One March day. Last year. Amid sirens and hurried orders, beneath the guilt in his eyes as he climbed into the military vehicle, Reed had entrusted Shape to the neighbor of his parents, a man who once spoiled the dog, who once swore he would care for him like his own. Reed believed, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he had to. Because without belief, he wouldn't have been able to cross that line between war and peace. And then 13 months passed. No word, no answer, no concrete reason to doubt, and no one to ask, until this very moment, when all those memories came crashing down in one breathless instant. When those clouded eyes looked into his, as if they had never stopped waiting. Reed trembled as he stood, gathering Shape into his arms. His body was terrifyingly light, his bones visible beneath dry, stretched skin, scratches unhealed, a hind leg twisted unnaturally, dried blood caked along his tail and hips. Reed dared not speak, afraid that if he did, the moment would shatter like a dream too fragile to exist. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a low battery warning. He quickly dialed the emergency vet hotline, his voice hoarse and broken. "There's a dog, abandoned. He's dying. I need help. Now please don't ask questions. Just send someone." The operator responded with a voice so calm it felt inhuman. Reed didn't remember what he said next. Only that he wrapped Shape in his jacket and ran, across the yard, through the rusted gate, nearly a full kilometer through darkness. No car, no light. Only a heart pounding loud enough to drown the world. By the time he reached the clinic, Shape had gone limp. His head rested in the crook of Reed's arm. His breaths were like torn threads, thin, uneven. Outside, night had fallen. But Reed couldn't feel anything except the hammering of his own pulse and the thud of his boots on the cold pavement. The veterinary clinic was a small house tucked at the end of an old street. Its wooden sign was faded. The glass door rattled with every gust of wind. No one should have been there at that hour. Except one person had stayed. A woman. silver hair pulled into a bun at the nape of her neck, a worn white coat, reading glasses low on her nose. She opened the door before Reed could knock. Didn't ask, didn't act surprised. Her eyes met his, not with pity, but with the look of someone who had once known pain. "Come in," she said, her voice low but steady. Reed hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, nodding his thanks. She led him down a short hallway into a small exam room. Dim lights, the scent of antiseptic and aged wood. No fancy machines, just a cold steel table and a few worn tools. But each of her movements was precise, silent. "Sure." "Put him here, gently," she instructed. Reed laid Shape down. He was so light, so cold. Every time Reed touched his skin, it felt like brushing the edge of a memory already fading. But the vet's hands didn't tremble. She placed a stethoscope to his chest, frowned, then checked his eyes, gums, reflexes. Her hands were soft as wind, her voice steady, almost like prayer. "He's fragile, but it's not too late. His heart is still beating. There's still a chance." Reed clenched his fists. "How much of a chance, doctor?" She removed her gloves and glasses, then sat across from him. "I don't give percentages. I give the truth." She pulled a paper and scribbled quickly. "Multi-organ failure, signs of collapse in heart, liver, kidneys from long-term malnutrition. Systemic infection, likely from an old wound on the hind leg, now mildly necrotic. Severe exhaustion, immune system near shutdown. If we don't begin fluids, antibiotics, and support within 24 hours, I'm afraid—" She didn't finish. Reed cut in. "Do it, whatever it costs. I have money. I have a military account." She studied him for a long time. In her gaze, Reed didn't see doubt. He saw a weighing of spirit. Then she spoke softly. "I need your signature. This case is high risk. Nothing is guaranteed, but if he makes it, it will take at least 6 months to recover. Are you ready for that?" Reed didn't hesitate. "I left him once. I won't do it again." She smiled, for the first time. Not long, not bright, but real. "Then we begin." Within 15 minutes, she summoned 2 assistants from the break room. One, likely a veterinary student, prepared the instruments and medications. The other handled the oxygen and IV setup. Reed was asked to step outside. He stood behind the glass door, watching. Inside him, everything felt frozen. Reed saw Shape, small and motionless on the steel table, surrounded by pale yellow light and the soft clatter of instruments. Each time the heart monitor gave off a long, sustained beep, Reed held his breath. Only when it resumed its steady rhythm did he dare to breathe again. Time passed slowly. Each minute felt like a year. Reed sank onto the plastic chair in the hallway, his face buried in his hands. Outside, it rained. Not heavily, but just enough to make everything colder. After a while, one of the assistants came out and handed him a paper cup of coffee. "She's good," he said. "If anyone can save your dog, it's her." Reed nodded, saying nothing. Inside him, thousands of questions, thousands of regrets, thousands of dark possibilities screamed all at once. But beyond that door, there was only one remaining hope. When Shape was taken into the treatment room, Reed stayed behind in the hallway, unmoving. Pale green walls, a crooked clock. His hands rested on his knees, lightly trembling. It felt like coming back to a chapter of memory that had never been closed. He didn't know how long he sat there. He only knew that, in those moments, everything came back. When Shape was just a pup, he used to bite Reed's bootlaces. Every morning, as Reed got ready to leave, his big military boots became the dog's favorite game. He didn't tear them up. He just gently clamped down and tugged backward, as if to say, Just a little more time. Stay with me a bit longer. Once, Reed pretended to scold him. No, Shape, I'm late. But the wagging tail, the bobbing head, the clear, trusting eyes made it impossible to walk away. Sometimes, the young soldier sat back down, retied his boots just to steal one more minute with his friend. Shape always leapt up when the door opened, even if Reed had only stepped out for 5 minutes. Whether he was taking out the trash or buying bread, the sound of keys in the lock was enough. Shape would be there, jumping like Reed had returned from across the world. There was no concept of time in a dog's loyalty. To Shape, every return was worth celebrating, worth bounding into Reed's arms with full, unshaken faith. Shape had the habit of lying beside the bed, refusing to sleep until Reed did. At first, Reed thought it was just a clingy behavior. But then there were nights he tossed and turned, unable to sleep, his mind full of ruins from training drills. Shape was always there, eyes open, silent, his head near Reed's hand. Only when he heard Reed's breath calm did he slowly close his eyes and begin to breathe softly, careful not to wake him. And then the nightmares began. They didn't come often, but when they did, they came like crashing waves. Reed would jolt up in the night, shirt soaked with sweat, hands trembling, eyes wide in panic like he was still inside a trench. In that chaos of darkness, Reed didn't know where he was. And then, a touch. Not a hand, not a voice, but a wet nose against his palm, a warm breath on his skin. Shape had risen, no one knew when. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just sat beside him, unblinking, watching, a gentle lick on the wrist, a soft nudge to the chest. And like magic, Reed's heart began to slow. The nightmare didn't vanish, but it had something to anchor to. The first time, Reed thought it was coincidence, but it happened again, and again. Every time the nightmares came, Shape was the first thing to bring him back to earth. No command, no signal, just a touch, a breath. No sound was more soothing than that breath. No therapy more powerful than the quiet presence of a soul that never left. One winter, Reed couldn't sleep for a whole week. He was so restless that he couldn't open his eyes during the day. Shape, instead of sleeping at night like usual, stayed awake too. He sat beside him, not nudging, not pleading, just being there. Reed cried that night, not from pain, but because he didn't feel worthy, and still he was loved. Still he was trusted. Another time, right before deployment, Reed was packing. Shape followed his every step. When Reed sat to fasten his backpack, Shape placed his chin on his knee. When he packed up his gear, Shape brought over his favorite toys, a torn rubber ball, an old sock Reed had forgotten, as if to say, "Take me with you. Take the familiar with you." But he couldn't. Reed had hugged Shape one last time and whispered in his ear, "I'll come back. Wait for me." Shape didn't answer. He simply licked Reed's hand, then sat on the porch, watching the military truck roll away like a silent statue. Now, sitting here in the hallway, recalling all of it, Reed felt every memory fall into place. Together they formed a single, clear shape, the shape of a promise no one kept. But one soul had kept it anyway. Shape hadn't forgotten, hadn't blamed, hadn't grown bitter. He had waited. And that, more than anything, was what Reed couldn't forgive himself for. Because sometimes, what breaks a man isn't the sound of gunfire. It's the memory of a tail once wagged, a pair of eyes that once followed, a promise once made, but never kept. He had promised to return, but like so many promises made during war, it had been swept away by sand and time. Only one thing remained. Shape had kept his word. He had waited, even if that waiting meant loneliness, hunger, pain, and being forgotten. Even when no one cared, even when everyone left. He stayed, like a piece of memory that had never disappeared. An old collar, with faded letters, was now the last remaining proof of an unkept promise. In a world where people often forget the small things, that name had preserved a fragment of soul no one else dared to hold on to. Shape, no longer just the name of a dog, but the name of a vow, a reminder, a tangible shape of something once spoken and never completed. That night, Reed didn't leave the veterinary clinic. He slumped in the hallway, eating nothing, sleeping even less. Sometimes he stood and paced in front of the treatment room. Every time the door opened, his heart clenched. Every time the surgical light flickered on, his spirit sank. And then, at 4 a.m., the doctor stepped out and sighed. He's stable, out of critical condition. But from here, it'll be another journey. Long, hard. He'll need you with him. Reed jumped to his feet, disbelief flooding his face. He'll live? She nodded. If there are no complications, if you follow every instruction, he's a fighter, but he needs someone to fight with him. Reed collapsed onto the edge of a table, gripping it tightly. He didn't cry, but cold sweat dripped down his face, as if his body had just been released from some invisible vice. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Come early tomorrow. I'll guide you through his care. But tonight, let him rest. Reed nodded. And when he looked back through the glass, Shape was asleep. Gently. No more tremors. No more broken breaths. A creature once thought lost, now resting, bathed in warm light, surrounded by steadfast hands. And he knew. This was the second time Shape had come back from death. But this time, Reed would be the one waiting. With everything words could never fully say. He didn't go home right away. Instead, Reed sat for an hour in his old pickup truck, forehead resting on the steering wheel. His heart was a tangle of guilt, hope, and an unspoken fear that he might lose Shape again. But when night fell, he returned. The wooden door creaked open, still the same house, dusty, silent, waiting to be brought back to life. Reed turned on the light, then turned it off. He chose the glow of a small table lamp. A warm light, enough to see, but not enough to disturb the quiet. He began cleaning. Not the kind of surface cleaning done out of habit, but a slow, intentional touching of each object, each corner, as if every item held a memory in need of release. Every speck of dust, every smudge was a forgotten moment. Reed wasn't just cleaning a house, he was retracing time. The floor, where his childhood steps once echoed, knees scraped, and laughter knew no fear. The window, where his father used to stand silently for hours, watching the garden in quiet afternoons, as if something outside remained unsaid. And the kitchen, where his mother cooked stew on rainy days, seasoned always with a kind of tenderness no word could name. He pulled down each moldy curtain, brushing gently as if afraid of harming time. He knelt and wiped every tile with warm cloth. Some were chipped, some sunken, but he didn't replace them, just cleaned them, as if preserving honest memories. The bedsheets were washed by hand and dried under the late afternoon sun. The new curtains weren't too white, just enough for sunlight to pass through as it used to. Then he stopped at the corner of the living room, not by accident, but as if instinct had led him there. There, Reed laid out a large, soft blanket. He smoothed each fold by hand. He stacked warm, dried towels into a cushion, making a soft nest, wide enough for a body once reduced to bones. An old pillow, once his mother's, was placed beside a stainless steel bowl that gleamed like a mirror. He didn't speak it aloud, but in his heart, he thought, "This is your bed now, Shape." This time, it's real. No one will leave you again. Then he went to the kitchen. He opened the fridge. Empty. Only some white rice and a bag of frozen greens remained. Reed paused for a moment, then grabbed his coat and walked to the night market. The market was damp, lit by yellow lamps, with few people passing by. But Reed moved slowly, as if he wasn't just picking ingredients, but choosing how to begin again. He selected fresh beef, tender, low-fat, baby carrots, pumpkin just ripe. Not much, just enough for one pot of stew, something easy to digest, easy to swallow. Back home, he peeled each piece, carrots diced into tiny cubes, pumpkin carefully peeled with a dull blade, so he worked slower but more gently. Reed wasn't a good cook. But that night, every movement, from chopping onions to stirring the pot, felt like a silent ritual of redemption, an unspoken effort to bridge 13 months, to make up for a farewell that never came at the right time. The stew began to boil. Its gentle aroma filled the house, slipping through door cracks, wrapping itself around the curtains, drifting all the way to where Shape lay sleeping. The air softened. There was no need for bright lights, just the warm golden glow from the kitchen and the mingling scent of meat and vegetables, as if home had never left. Reed didn't eat. He just sat there, watching the soup bubble in silence. His gaze drifted far, through the flame, through the steam, to some place not here. Maybe to the image of a younger Shape curled up in his army jacket at the barracks, ears twitching at the sound of boots marching past. Maybe to the last time Shape barked as Reed left home, that look in his eyes as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. Or maybe to the moment he found Shape in the broken wooden kennel, barely breathing. When life had become so thin, so fragile, that even a single step away might have made it disappear forever. Reed carried the bowl of soup to Shape's bedside. The scent made the dog's ears twitch slightly. He didn't open his eyes, didn't move, but his chest rose more visibly. Reed took a spoon, scooped up a small portion, and brought it gently to the edge of Shape's mouth. He didn't eat, but his lips trembled, like he sensed something familiar. Reed whispered, "It's okay, tomorrow's fine. We have time." And this time, Reed truly believed it. That night he lay on the floor, just a breath's distance from Shape. No thick blanket, no bed, just a thin layer of fabric beneath his back. But for Reed, it was the only place he could rest, because from there, if Shape needed him, he would hear. Every tiny action, lifting the lid, wiping the bowl's rim, folding a warm towel, became a form of presence, not to be thanked, not to be noticed, but a quiet message to the sleeping creature beside him. This time, I'm not leaving. And the house, once abandoned, began to warm again, not from rising temperature, but because two souls had chosen to stay, one learning how to care again, one learning how to trust, and between them, a small bed, a handmade stew, and a scent that never left. By morning, Reed returned to the clinic. The doctor greeted him with a soft smile, no questions needed. She helped him place Shape into a fabric-lined basket, wrapped carefully like a child. Shape opened his eyes, blinked slowly, weak but aware. Reed exhaled deeply. At home, Reed set the basket gently in the middle of the room. He didn't lift Shape out right away. He sat beside him and spoke softly. "This is home, Shape. We're starting over, right here." He ladled soup into a bowl and placed it near the dog's nose. Shape didn't eat, but his eyes followed Reed. Those eyes no longer shone like they once did, but they still held that same gaze. The one that once convinced Reed that even if the world exploded outside, there would always be somewhere to return to. Reed smiled faintly. "It's okay. Tomorrow's fine. You don't have to rush. We have time." He spoke as if soothing his own soul. Time, something once stolen by war and fear, was now rekindled, spoon by spoon, carrot by carefully diced carrot, grain by grain of rice rinsed in warm water. That night, Reed didn't sleep in his bed. He lay on the hardwood floor, just a few steps from Shape's bed. No mattress, no pillow, just a thin blanket. But to him, it was the only place he deserved to be. Because some apologies cannot be spoken. They can only be lived, quietly, closely, and without leaving. Each of Shape's breaths, no matter how faint, was a question that needed no answer. And Reed's presence was his only reply. "I'm here now. I'm not leaving again." The days that followed became a quiet loop of devotion. Nothing glamorous, nothing needing witness. Reed woke at 6 a.m. every day, checked the room temperature, adjusted the heater to just the right warmth, not too dry for Shape's nose. He moved gently, afraid even a small sound might startle the dog. Then he reheated the stew, using a porcelain spoon, not metal, to avoid clinking that might cause distress. He relearned how to inject into thin, bruised skin. His hands shook the first time, but the doctor's voice echoed in his mind like breath. "Just do it like placing a note on a music sheet." He cleaned every wound, not quickly, but with patience. Each time Shape flinched in pain, Reed whispered, "I'm sorry. Just a little more." Shape never replied, but every time he stayed still, it was a kind of permission, a quiet forgiveness. Every time Shape lifted his head, it was a victory. He didn't have to stand. Just to hold his own weight with his neck, to look toward Reed, was enough for him to write in his notebook, "Lifted head, 10 seconds, circled." Bolded. He recorded everything, when breathing was steady, how often he blinked, the warmth of his ears, the moisture of his nose, the reflex when his paw was touched, each detail like a sketch of life redrawn, fragile, trembling, but clear. Then one morning, Shape touched his nose to Reed's hand. Reed had dozed off, slumped over the bedside. The first thing he felt was a gentle warmth, not quite wet, but definitely alive. He opened his eyes, thinking he was dreaming. But no. Those deep, familiar eyes were looking right at him. For a few seconds, neither moved, neither spoke, just presence, full and quiet, like two broken souls finding each other again, in the middle of what was once ruin. That evening, Reed placed a small speaker beside Shape's bed. He didn't choose a sorrowful tune. He played Chopin, gentle, wordless, just the sound of breath shaped into melody. He sat beside Shape, one hand resting lightly on the dog's back, feeling every rise and fall of his chest. Not steady, but rhythmic. A sign of return. Reed no longer saw Shape as an abandoned dog. He was proof of something larger, of endurance, of a love that needed no words. Each time Reed tore a piece of meat into tiny shreds and placed it at Shape's cracked lips, he wasn't just feeding him. He was saying, "I still believe, and I believe in you." The house began to change. Not cleaner, more alive. The dust on the staircase faded after each pass of Reed's cloth. The air felt lighter. Even the wind whistling through the cracks seemed less cold. Because inside, two beings were learning how to exist again. Reed, once a man driven by battlefield reflexes, was now guided by gentler instincts. He no longer measured in days, but in signs. Not, "It's the 5th day since I returned." But, "Today, Shape drank 3 spoonfuls of water without the tube." And Shape, he didn't need to stand or run. He just needed to open his eyes in the morning, without fear, without seizures, to stretch one paw, to wag his tail at the sound of familiar footsteps, each small gesture, a memory reawakening. Every action from Reed, folding a towel, mixing warm water, whispering something no one else heard, was a quiet apology. unspoken, unannounced, but more sincere than anything words could offer. And that was the small fire, a fleeting hope, rekindled each day. Not because Reed believed Shape would fully recover, but because he believed that presence, that staying, was already a miracle. In that old house, there were no barks, no calls, only breathing. And that breath, it was an apology, a beginning, and proof that trust, even when abandoned, could return. Slowly, gently, and just enough to save them both. In that old house there were no barks, no calls, only breathing. And that breath, it was an apology, a beginning, and proof that trust, even when abandoned, could return. Slowly, gently, and just enough to save them both. That night, the wind brushed against the metal roof. Dry branches clattered on the wooden porch. Inside, Shape lay motionless on the bed made of layered, soft towels. His breathing was steady, not deep, but regular, as if life had returned without needing to announce itself. Beside him, Reed lay curled on a thin blanket. No bed, no pillow, just the wooden floor and a distance small enough that one touch could still happen. His eyes were closed, but his nerves were tight as strings. A sound came, from somewhere, not loud, not clear, but enough to snap his eyes open. Cold sweat dampened the back of his neck. His hand curled, searching for a weapon. Quickened breath, tense lungs. Not from exhaustion, but from memory. Memories that hadn't faded with borders or time. They stormed in like a midnight tempest, tearing down the walls between now and then. In his mind, explosions, dust, screams, metal slicing air like a shrieking siren. Someone called his name, a voice broken loose from the past. He shot upright, heart racing, chest collapsing. The air in the room felt stolen. Reed doubled over, palms on the floor, gasping like someone pulled from water. And then, a movement. So small, so slow. From Shape's bed, a form began to shift. He couldn't walk, but he crawled, using his front legs. His body dragged across the floor like a shadow gliding through wreckage. Each move made him pant, but he didn't stop. Once, then again, each push tearing through his healing pain. But Shape kept going, not out of instinct, but something deeper. Connection. Every inch forward was a defiance of pain. A message. I'm still here. I know you're drowning. Reed didn't notice at first. He was busy holding himself up, trying not to fall, trying not to let the darkness inside consume him, like all those nights before. But then, a touch, soft, slow, a nose pressed into his chest. Reed startled, opened his eyes, and saw Shape. The dog had placed his head on Reed's chest. No bark, no whine, just closed eyes and breath, a slow, wide, steady breath, each exhale filtered through pain, but unbroken. Reed let go, sat still, and let himself tremble. But this time, not from fear, because now, he knew. He wasn't alone. Shape said nothing. He couldn't. But he had dragged himself through pain, through the line between reflex and consciousness, just to reach Reed, to lay his head there, on his chest, like an anchor, a milestone, a launch pad for something beginning again. They sat there in the dark. No one spoke, no one moved. A man once screaming in dreams, a soul once waiting in ruins. Now, reaching each other in the only way they still believed in. Presence, no promises, no expectations. Just staying. The wind outside whispered through the cracks in the doors. Moonlight draped its silver hue across the old wooden floor. And there, in the middle of it all, stood a man, and a creature once left behind. They breathed, together. No reasons needed, no words, only the knowing that someone was still listening. And if you listen long enough, a soul can step into another's dream. not to speak, but to remind, I never left you, not ever. That night, between the rhythm of breath and the scent of old wood, between panic and peace, between trauma and the present, Reed knew he had been saved. Not by medicine, not by therapy, but by a single touch. A touch from a creature who had never learned how to give up. You came for me? Reed asked, not expecting a reply. There was no hope in his tone, no need for confirmation. Just a voice breaking through from deep within, where cracks had never sealed. But in Shape's fragile breathing, there was a subtle tremor, like wind brushing the surface of still water. Not sound, not reflex, just breath, carrying more meaning than any word Reed had heard in all his years as a soldier. A response without language, but one that pierced through the thickest armor in his soul. Reed didn't sleep again that night, but he no longer shook, no longer curled beneath cold sweat, no longer sat upright in darkness, straining for ghosts. Shape, still there, his head resting on Reed's chest, was breathing, steady, slow, just enough to remind Reed that life was still present, no matter how thin it seemed. And in that moment, a weary soul, once abandoned, stepped into the dream of a soldier who thought he'd lost the ability to dream. A soul, with 4 weary legs and broken breath, touched the deepest part of a man's heart. Not with strength, not with sound, but with existence. The next morning, when sunlight filtered through the faded curtains, Reed woke. His eyes stung, not from nightmares, but because for the first time, he felt light. As if he had finally let go of the pack he'd carried across miles without knowing why he couldn't put it down. Shape was still there, right beside him, sleeping, not curled in fear, not gasping for air, just a tired being, finally allowed to be tired. No need to brace, no need to be ready for war, and that was what brought tears down Reed's cheeks, silent and unstoppable. He rose from the old blanket and went into the kitchen. The tap water was still freezing, but he boiled it, brewed tea with dusty old bags, and played a quiet instrumental track. The sound, soft as breath, seeped gently into spaces inside him that had once been frozen solid. He sat beside Shape's bed and opened his notebook and wrote, Night 6, no startling, no medication. Maybe we're starting to trust each other. From that day on, Reed slept beside Shape every night, not out of fear he'd relapse, not out of worry, but because he too needed something real, a breath, a heartbeat, another soul nearby, to keep from falling again. Some nights, Shape crawled closer. Other nights, he simply lay still, breathing soft as mist. But every night, there was breathing. And that rhythm, it was what tethered Reed to the world. The old house, once a ruin of absence, slowly changed. Not through furniture, not through paint, but through presence. A small plant on the windowsill, once thought dead, began to bloom. Sparrows returned to the roof, and mornings, once the worst part of the day for Reed, no longer felt like threats. He began waking early, not from panic, but from wanting to see Shape breathe in peace, wanting to make soup before the dog woke, wanting to let Chopin play softly before the sun rose. And for the first time, he didn't need sleeping pills. One night, Reed dreamed. But it wasn't a nightmare. In the dream, there was a golden field under the setting sun. There was wind rustling the tall grass, and in the distance, a dog running free, no leash, no bandages, no signs of pain, no gunfire, no blood, no bodies, only light, and a peace so deep that when he awoke, tears soaked his pillow and he didn't know why. Shape touched his cheek, not with his paw, not with his nose, but with a lick, gentle, clumsy, as if still learning how to connect again, and just that was enough to make Reed laugh, a short, soft laugh. But real! He placed a hand on Shape's head, stroking from brow to neck. An act that had once been reflex, now returned as privilege. He whispered, uncertain if aloud or just in his heart. "Thank you." And in the light of a cloudless day, with sunlight spilling through dusty blinds, Reed looked at Shape and murmured, "I came back for you. But maybe you're the one who brought me back." Mornings in the old house were no longer frozen in a numbing silence. They had become something else. Still quiet, yes, but no longer cold. Stillness remained, but it was peace, not emptiness. Reed Saul woke before the sun, made himself tea, put on soft music, swept the floor, jotted down notes in a small notepad. For the first time in months, he felt there was something about today worth waiting for. On the small bed in the corner of the living room, Shape stirred. At first, just a tired yawn. Then slowly he lifted his head. A small motion, yet one that held the weight of the universe. His frail neck trembled with effort. Amber eyes looked at Reed, then at the water bowl placed nearby. Reed remained still. No urging, no coaxing. He simply placed a hand on the table's edge and waited. Shape moved. One leg, then another. Starved muscles convulsed. Fractured joints seemed to plead for mercy, but he didn't stop. Inching forward, breath quick and shallow, hind legs clenched tight, he stretched his neck, and his tongue touched the surface of the water. Reed nearly broke into tears. He didn't clap, didn't cheer. He simply bowed his head, hands clasped together like someone giving thanks. In that moment, there was no rescuer, no rescued, only two living beings, learning how to exist all over again. From that day forward, Shape no longer needed the bowl right next to the bed. Reed placed it a little farther each day, recording every distance in his notebook. Day 10, Shape moved 70 centimeters on his own. He still couldn't stand, but he could crawl, to the food bowl, to the sunlight, to Reed's side each night. As for Reed, he gave up sleeping pills. At first, the nights were hard. His body twisted in restlessness, eyes wide open to the ceiling, ears alert like they were trained to hear gunfire at any second. But then, he remembered the breathing, not his, but Shape's. Soft, long, even. He inhaled in time with that rhythm, exhaled the same, and strangely, he slept. The first breakfast he made for himself was oatmeal and eggs, coffee brewed by hand, not the quick dissolve kind. He set 2 plates on the table, one for himself, one for Shape, still the same slow-cooked stew and mashed vegetables. Shape never finished his portion. But every spoonful swallowed lifted a little weight from Reed's chest. They began to find rhythm. Not fast, not perfect, but real. Mornings, wake early. Noon, sunbathe. Afternoon, read beside one another. Evenings, Chopin or Satie. Sometimes Reed would lower his book, scratch behind Shape's ear, and see him stretch out his legs. A lazy motion, yet so alive. One afternoon, Reed tried opening the back door. It had been a long time since sunlight was allowed to fill the house. The door creaked open, and the late light spilled in like a greeting. Golden, warm, gently unfamiliar. Shape squinted, overwhelmed by the light he had once forgotten. But he didn't shrink, didn't look away. He looked, slowly, cautiously, but he looked. It was a small thing, but to Reed, it was a miracle. He crouched down and gently lifted Shape into his arms. The frail body pressed against him like a breathing memory, delicate, trembling, but still alive. He laid Shape on a folded blanket on the wooden porch, the same porch where his father once sat on autumn afternoons, where his mother used to hang clothes and tell stories. Reed sat beside him, saying nothing. Together, they looked out into the yard. Before them, the old maple tree had begun to turn, green giving way to gold, then amber. The leaves had not yet fallen, but something in their color whispered, time was moving, and change could not be stopped. A light breeze stirred the canopy, and in that moment a sparrow landed on the mossy fence. Shape's ears twitched, then his tail wagged, not fast, not strong, but it moved. A small motion, carrying an entire universe of return. That night, as the house settled into its hush, Reed wrote in his notebook, Day 15, he saw the sky. So did I. Days 16 through 19 passed slowly. Nothing obvious changed. But Reed sensed that every joint in Shape's body was relearning how to live. He began stretching his neck more. Every morning, when sunlight hit the wooden floor, he would try to crawl toward it and lie still. Reed didn't help. He just watched quietly, sometimes plucking an old melody, sometimes reading aloud, like his mother used to do. Day 20, Shape held himself up on both front legs for a few seconds. No warning, no signs. Reed was chopping vegetables in the kitchen when he heard the floor creak. He turned. There was Shape, trying to stand, front legs trembling like young trees in early wind. Reed didn't rush. He stood nearby, solid as a wall, but didn't touch. And when Shape collapsed, Reed sat beside him, patting his lap. Shape crawled to him, slow, painful, but purposeful, rested his head on Reed's knee. They both breathed. They both were. That kind of understanding. No words could carry. Day 25. Reed began tying a soft cloth around Shape, like a support harness, and walked with him out into the yard. He didn't call, didn't urge, just walked beside him. When Shape grew tired, they stopped. When Shape lay down, Reed lay down too. They watched the sky, counted clouds, listened to the wind through branches. One day, Shape slipped, fell hard, panting until his lips turned bluish. Reed didn't panic. He knelt beside him, cleaned his belly, stroked his spine gently, and whispered, We're not in a rush. You don't need to go anywhere. Day 30. The air turned crisp. Dew clung to the grass. Reed led Shape to the yard, like every morning. But today, Shape did something new. He stood, trembling, on all four legs. His eyes looked toward the house. Reed froze, throat tight. That image, a creature once too weak to move, once known only by breath, now standing, even for a few seconds, was something no language could ever capture. You don't have to go anywhere, Reed whispered, his voice barely audible. Just stay. From that day on, every afternoon came with footsteps, not far, not steady, but steps nonetheless. And those steps weren't about leaving. They were about presence, about proving that what once broke could bloom again. At night, when classical music floated through the old house, Reed sat down to write. The handwriting was crooked, but honest. Day 32. He doesn't look at me like a stranger anymore. Day 35, the house began to smell like life again. Not just the scent of soup or tea, but the kind of air that had been breathed in by two souls who once thought they were lost. The scent of freshly washed rugs, of windows left open, of clothes sun-dried under real sunlight. Reed realized he had turned the lights on without fear, had played music without needing to drown out the sound of his own heartbeat. Day 40. The cactus on the windowsill bloomed again. A single, milky white flower opening in the golden sun. Reed didn't say anything, but there was light in his eyes. And then one morning, without warning, before the sun had fully risen, while the air still held the scent of night dew, Reed woke. He turned his head and saw Shape standing beside the bed, not crawling, not dragging, standing on all four legs, trembling but balanced. "Good morning, soldier," Reed said, his throat tight. No bark, but Shape stepped forward and touched his nose gently to the back of Reed's hand. One slow wag of the tail, then stillness. His gaze was no longer lost. It was focused. And that focus was here. From that moment on, they entered a new place. They no longer counted days as time ticking away, but as moments of rebirth. There was no need for goals, no need for plans. Because for souls who had fallen to the deepest silence, the first steps weren't meant to lead somewhere. They were meant to stay. A week later, on a sunny weekend morning, Reed decided to take Shape to the park, for the first time since the long days of rebuilding. Not far, just a trail that circled a small lake. There were trees, there was wind, there were children laughing near the grass. Shape rode in a cart Reed had modified himself. Soft rubber wheels, thick fabric lining, and a front opening just large enough for his head to poke through. They moved slowly, in a rhythm like a familiar piece of classical music. Shape seemed to enjoy the air here. He inhaled deeply, ears perked at birdsong, eyes brightening whenever sunlight hit his face. A young boy approached and asked if he could pet him. Reed nodded. Shape tilted his head, not barking, not backing away, just gently touched the boy's hand with his nose. Once again, as always, his presence was the answer. They turned down a path near the playground. Reed stopped the cart, sat beside Shape, and took out a cloth to wipe his legs. Shape licked his hand, his first spontaneous gesture since recovery began. Reed smiled. Something inside him softened, as if the last layer of ice had finally melted under true warmth. And then, peace shattered. A piercing scream echoed from the distant grass. Reed turned. A large dog, pit bull or some kind of mixed fighter, had broken free, sprinting straight toward a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old. No one reacted fast enough. The handler had fallen, the leash dragging. Everything happened in a sliver of time, like a blade slicing between life and danger. Reed leapt to his feet. But before he could take a step, something moved in the cart. Shape. He launched himself out of the side, landing on his front legs. He didn't stand firm, but he tried. His eyes locked onto the girl, frozen in terror. No one else moved toward her. Only Shape. "Shape!" Reed yelled, but nothing could stop him now. With a body not yet healed, Shape ran, each stride a defiance of pain. Not strong, not fast, but direct. The other dog was close, its mouth wide, eyes red with fury. But then, a black shadow cut in from the side. Shape collided. No dodge, no tactic. He simply threw himself in. The impact cracked through the air like a heart breaking. Shape was thrown. His body flipped, arcing for a moment, then slammed into the ground with the heavy thud of something dropped from great height. The grass dented beneath him, stained instantly with a spreading patch of blood. The charging dog stumbled sideways, disoriented. It growled, ready to lunge again. But 3 men surged forward. One gripped its neck. Another pinned its legs. Shouts rang out. Someone yelled for the police. Chaos erupted across the park. But Reed heard none of it. He saw only one thing. A small figure lying still in the grass. He ran. His feet didn't touch the ground like normal steps. Everything blurred. Wind, voices, the metallic smell of blood. It all dissolved into mist. Only that Shape remained, barely breathing. He lay sprawled on the ground. One ear torn wide open, nearly split apart. A hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood soaked through the fur on his back, spreading like a wound rewriting the price of courage. Reed dropped to his knees. He didn't care about the crowd. Didn't hear the voices calling his name. He lifted Shape into his arms, gently, as if cradling a child. The dog's body was limp, but his eyes were still open. Clouded, fading, but not gone. There was still something there, like the last ember in a dying hearth. "Why would you do that?" Reed whispered, voice cracking. And still, you didn't hesitate. Shape didn't whimper, didn't move, but he hadn't passed out. His mouth opened slightly, as if struggling to draw in one more breath. Each gasp was ragged, broken, as if dragging the full weight of life along with it. A woman from the crowd stepped forward with a white cloth. Her hands trembled. A man shouted into his phone, voice rising with urgency. "The dog's badly injured, losing a lot of blood. We need a vet ambulance now." Reed held Shape tighter. Blood seeped into his shirt, blooming like an old curse returning. But this time, he wasn't letting go. When the emergency vet truck arrived, Reed refused to let anyone else touch Shape. He climbed inside, holding the dog close, like clinging to the final breath left in a living soul. Inside the vehicle, silence pressed down on everyone. No one spoke. Reed leaned in close, whispering as if summoning a spirit back from the edge. "You did so well. Hold on, just once more. Stay with me once more." The familiar vet clinic came into view. Reed burst through the doors, still carrying Shape. An older woman, silver-haired, eyes lined with decades of knowing, stepped out. The moment she saw him, she paused. "It's him again?" she asked. Not surprised, not exasperated, just complete understanding. Reed nodded. He didn't need to say a word. Shape was laid on the surgical table. Nurses rushed in with fluids, checked vitals, sterilized wounds. The torn ear needed stitching. The broken leg required splinting. The blood loss was critical. The heartbeat, erratic. "The line is thin," the doctor murmured, her voice low like a prayer. "But he came back once before. Maybe he can do it again." Reed waited outside the operating room for hours, his arms still stained with Shape's blood. His eyes never left the red light above the door. The light that signaled the battle between life and loss was still raging inside. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He just sat there, unmoving, fists clenched, hands trembling. The waiting room seemed to lose shape. Everything around Reed blurred. The flickering neon light above him pulsed like a soulless reminder that time was still moving forward, even though his soul had frozen in that moment when Shape collapsed on the grass. He no longer saw a hallway or a hospital, only the image replaying, Shape's run, no hesitation, no turning back. A leap carved from sheer will, lodged forever in Reed's memory like an arrow that could never be withdrawn. He remembered those eyes just moments before, eyes that had seen something far away and still chose to stay. No command, no signal. Shape didn't run because he was triggered. He chose to run because it was the right thing to do. Reed closed his eyes, hands still clasped. How many times had he sworn to protect Shape? How many promises had he whispered, vowing he'd never let the dog suffer again? But once again, it was Shape who stepped in. It was Shape, body broken, lying silent in his arms while the world looked on. "You're not just the dog who was saved," Reed murmured, throat burning. Each word scraped out like it tore through him. "You're the one who saved me, twice, and now, a little girl too." No one needed to hear it, but it had to be said, like a confession to himself. The light went off. The red light above the door stopped blinking. The door slowly opened. A wave of antiseptic and cold air drifted from the recovery room. The doctor stepped out, pulled down her mask. Her eyes were tired, but they hadn't given up. "He's stable, but very weak. He'll need close watch. He'll need you beside him. No questions. No explanations. Reed stood, as if the weight on his shoulders had disappeared for a moment. His legs were still numb, but his heart was allowed one normal beat again. He stepped inside. The room was cold. Still. Every medical device beeped in rhythm: heart monitor, oxygen line, transfusion drip. But through all the sounds, one rose above the rest: the soft, steady breathing of Shape. He lay there, on a clean pad, his fur shaved in places, revealing rows of stitches, one ear torn and bandaged, the back leg set in a cast. A blood bag hung above, the tubing gently swaying with each weak pulse. But he was breathing. He was alive. Reed sat down, said nothing, just one simple act, placing a hand on Shape's head. His touch was so light it didn't disturb the wound, but firm enough that Shape would know. Someone is here. Someone came. He didn't cry, didn't smile. He just left his hand there, as if holding on to something that had come heartbreakingly close to slipping away forever. His hand was warm. His other hand gripped a crumpled notebook, the one where every step of recovery had been recorded. Something softened in Reed's chest, like an exhale barely heard, carrying tears that no longer needed to fall. Since returning to his hometown, he had never truly been sure he was alive. He existed. He breathed. But inside, all was ruin. Only when he laid his hand on a creature that had brushed against death did he finally feel what it meant to live. Because love doesn't have to be loud, and courage does not always roar. Sometimes courage is a silent leap into danger while others scream. It's a gaze that never waits for praise. It's a dog with broken bones and blood-stained fur who still chooses to stand in front, not behind. Another life. Reed looked at Shape. His breathing was weak but steady, not gasping, not fading. He breathed to say, quietly, that he had chosen to stay. Reed remembered it all: the park, the scream, the blinding sun, and that small figure bursting out from between two stunned adults. No one thought he could run. No one imagined he would choose to. And what broke Reed's heart more than anything was this: Shape hadn't thought of the cost. He didn't know he would break a leg. He didn't know his ear would tear so deep it would need stitching. All he knew was that a life needed protection. And that was enough for Shape to decide. Reed sighed, leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against Shape's. Cold, but alive. "You didn't have to," he whispered, a quiet confession to himself. "But you did." And sometimes, the only thing that keeps a person from feeling lost in this world is knowing that somewhere there is a soul, wounded, fragile, who still chooses to protect you with all they have left. Shape had done it again. No command, no call. Because for him, staying was not just survival. It was living. For love. Reed slid his chair back and sat beside the recovery bed for the entire night. The lights in the room stayed on, but his eyes finally closed, not from exhaustion, but from peace. And in the first sleep he had known in countless nights, he dreamed of a wide field, of sunlight, and a shadow running toward him. No gunfire, no blood, just grass, warmth, and a soul who had chosen once more to stay and walk beside him. The story of the dog who saved a little girl in the park spread like wind. Someone had captured the moment Shape leapt, not to a command, not pulled by a leash, just a lone dive into danger. The video swept through social media with the headline, "Backyard Guardian." Within hours, thousands of comments poured in. Some cried watching. Others shared memories of dogs they had once loved just the same. Veterans spoke of understanding the look in Shape's eyes, the eyes of a being who had survived things better left unspoken. One comment read, I was a soldier once. I know not everyone makes it out with their heart intact. That dog, he didn't just survive. He kept a heart beating for those who lost theirs. Reed saw it all on the screen of his old phone. For the first time in years, he reopened a long-forgotten social media account. And for the first time, he posted a photo. Not of the battlefield. Not a badge. Just this shape, his head bandaged, his leg in a brace, resting against Reed's knee. Below it, Reed typed only a few words. He waited for me, helped me live again. And now, he saved someone I never even knew. Soon, thousands of shares, hundreds of comments. But one message, just one, froze Reed's hand in the air. I was going to end my life tonight, but because of that dog, I'm still here. I don't know why, but I believe if a fragile creature like that still chooses to stay, maybe I can try one more day too. Reed read the message again, and again. He didn't reply. Not yet. He turned to Shape, sleeping now, breath steady, lips twitching as if in a dream. And in that moment, Reed understood. What Shape had done was more than saving a child. He had reached others he would never meet, souls suspended on the edge of despair. And he had done it simply by being. A being once broken, once abandoned, once saved, and still choosing to save. Reed opened the window. The breeze of early morning drifted in. He sat beside Shape again, hand resting on the dog's back. The other hand held a pen, and he wrote, Day 41. We're not whole yet, but we're learning to stay, for something, not for ourselves, but for someone else. That morning, the press came knocking. Reed declined interviews. But when a reporter asked if he had anything to say to those who had been touched by the story, he answered, Not everyone needs a dog, but I believe we all need something to remind us. There are still beings out there who choose to stay, even when the world has never been kind to them. Later that day, the woman who had sent the message wrote again. I bought a small flower pot, placed it by the window. For the first time in months, I want to see what it becomes. Reed smiled. A smile not for himself, but because he knew. Shape's story didn't end with him. He didn't just save one person. He saved the scattered pieces of those who once believed no one had the patience to reach them. An old man sent a photo. In it, he was sitting beside a blind, aging dog. He wrote, We're both old now. But this morning, because of the backyard guardian, I decided to take him for a walk again. A high school teacher printed Shape's photo and pinned it on the class bulletin board, writing beneath, Even in weakness, choose courage. Even in pain, choose love. A young woman wrote, I don't have a dog, but I have a younger brother struggling with depression. I told him about Shape. He said, he wants to try again. Each line, each small message, was like a breath Shape had preserved inside a body once broken. And in that way, a dog who used to curl up in the forgotten corner of a backyard became a source of light. Not because he barked the loudest, not because he was trained to fight, but because he chose to love, chose to stay, with everything he had left. And that kind of love, even when it bloomed in the shadows of a quiet backyard, could still reach further than any signal in this world. Shape was no longer a wounded dog who got rescued. He was a living memory, a testament to something deeply simple, that sometimes, to change someone, you don't need strength. You just need to stay, to not walk away. You just need to sit there, beside them, until they feel safe enough to stand on their own. When the message from Hero Dog of the Year arrived, Reed thought it was a mistake. A formal email with a picture of Shape attached from the news article. They wrote, We would like to honor Shape as a living symbol of courage and healing. Reed read it and closed the laptop. He didn't reply, not because he wasn't proud, but because Shape was still recovering. His leg was still bandaged. The wounds hadn't fully closed, and Reed himself wasn't someone who felt comfortable in front of a crowd. He was used to silence, used to being behind the scenes, used to seeing the world only from a window, from a small kitchen, through the eyes of a dog. That evening, Shape lay on his old bed, the blanket folded neatly beside him. Reed sat nearby, one hand resting on the dog's back. He whispered, "We don't need a medal. You've been a hero for a long time." Shape didn't answer, but his tail moved. A soft wag, not strong, not certain, but clear. And his eyes, they were the same as the very first day, quiet but full of direction. The next morning, Reed reopened the email. This time, he replied. He accepted the invitation. The journey to the awards ceremony wasn't long, but for Shape, every step was a small test. First, the car ride. He used to hate the engine's growl, used to curl into himself at the rumble behind him. But this time, he lifted his head, looked out the window. Calm. Then came the hotel. Strange smells, strangers, glances, cameras. Reed stayed close to Shape, but never ahead. He knew. Shape needed space, needed to walk in his own way. On the night of the ceremony, the stage was grand, the lights bright, the rows of seats filled with people. Deep red chairs stretched beneath the stage lights, holding the weight of stories waiting to be told. This was not a regular event. This was a place that honored beings who once broke, who once stayed silent, and who stood up again with only instinct to guide them. Each dog awarded had their own story. One had pulled someone from a fire. Another had found survivors beneath the rubble. One had stayed beside a dementia patient for years. The hall echoed with applause. Tears. Awe. Then came Shape's turn. The lights dimmed. A video played on the screen. It opened with Shape lying in the mud, eyes hollow. Then a clip of him trembling as he stood for the first time in weeks. And finally, the footage of him launching his body to shield the little girl from the attacking dog, his back soaked in red. No narration, just soft music and the sound of breathing. Reed stood beside him, wearing a suit, white shirt, black tie. For the first time in years, he dressed neatly, not for attention, but to honor the soul standing beside him. The host invited them onto the stage. The lights softened. Every eye turned toward the aisle. Reed bent down and placed his hand on Shape's collar, a small gesture, but full of weight. We're not here for applause, just to remind them that one soul chose not to turn away. Shape lifted his head, his eyes fixed on the glow ahead. Then he walked, slowly, but steady. Each step carried the memory of pain and the strength to rise again. Under the lights, his coat shimmered like silver. The room held its breath. The entire audience rose to their feet, not because he barked, not because he performed, but because he was there. A presence real and beautiful beyond any story. On stage, the host handed the medal to Reed, in honor of Shape, a star-shaped medallion engraved with the words, "Hero Dog of the Year." Reed took the medal. He didn't say much, just raised a photograph, an old picture, where Shape leaned gently against his knee after the day they saved someone. The image was faded, but the eyes in it were sharp as ever. He said, "His name is Shape, because to me, he was the first form of trust after so many years of not believing in anything at all." No one spoke, no applause, not even a breath stirred, just silence, not awkward, but reverent. Then someone began to clap, softly, slowly, but it spread like a ripple, and soon the entire hall rose once again, not to cheer, but to bear witness to a soul who had lived true. Reed bent down and stroked Shape's back, the way one thanks a being who never needed words. They stepped down from the stage, not hurried, not proud, but like the final movement of a symphony, ending on its most beautiful, quiet note. The next day, the local paper released a new issue. On the front page, stark against the white background, was a photo of Shape. The dog who once carried a torn and broken body, now sitting upright on the stage of honor. His head tilted slightly, ears raised, as if listening to something beyond applause or announcements. The golden light softened across his eyes. Eyes that had seen war, reflected abandonment, lay waiting for death in a dark cage, and now were at peace. The headline, bold in italic black ink, read, "The Dog Who Didn't Give Up on Anyone." Reed stood at the newsstand in a small store down the street. He didn't grab the paper immediately, just looked at it for a few minutes, as if making sure that what he had lived through had truly been seen, recorded, and acknowledged by the world. Then he took 2 copies. One he folded carefully, slipping it into the inside pocket of his coat, like tucking away a piece of reborn past. The other he brought home. In the wooden cabin that once felt cold and dim, Reed chose a spot by the window, the place where morning light always arrived first. Beneath it was a small bed, lined with soft towels and a light blanket, Shape's favorite place to sleep. Reed said nothing. He simply pinned the newspaper clipping to the wall, smoothing its edges, then sat down quietly on the wooden floor. Shape was asleep, but not long after he stirred gently, then lifted his head. His deep brown eyes found the image on the wall. He couldn't read the words, but he understood everything beyond them. He didn't bark, didn't move much, just stared. A gaze filled with presence, as if to say, "That is me, and that is us." Reed looked back at Shape. His heart softened, not from a sudden wave of emotion, but from a realization slowly settling in. That name, Shape, would never fade again. No longer just a tag carved into a rusted collar. No longer a name only Reed knew and called. Shape had become a story, a symbol, a living proof that a soul, once discarded and silenced by pain, when reached the right way, could become a light for those who never thought they deserved to be seen. That name would be how Reed answered all the questions that once choked him into silence. Whenever someone asked, "How did you survive all that?" he wouldn't talk about prescriptions, wouldn't list the therapists, wouldn't speak of the nights strapped to wires in a dim therapy room, because all of that, while necessary, had never touched the darkest part of him. That part was only reached by a creature who didn't speak, but always knew how to stay. And so Reed's answer would always be, "I had a friend. He didn't speak, but he never walked away." And that alone was enough. One afternoon, a young woman knocked on Reed's door. She didn't say much, just held out a handwritten letter, then turned and walked away. Inside the letter, she wrote, "I once believed no one could understand the weight of loss without having to explain it. But because of Shape's story, I realized I'm not alone. In a world growing noisier by the day, where people search for meaning through louder voices, polished resumes, and glittering speeches, sometimes the one thing that keeps a person grounded is a silence that stays. A breath beside you, a quiet lean against your knee, a gaze that doesn't question." On a pale gray afternoon, with the sun leaning behind the rooftops, Reed heard a knock at the door. Not urgent, not forceful, just 3 knocks, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. He opened it. On the porch stood a young woman, small frame, hair tied in haste, eyes shadowed from sleeplessness. She didn't speak, just held out a handwritten letter. Her hands trembled faintly, but her eyes were steady, like someone who had come a very long way to arrive at the right place. Reed took the letter. She gave a small nod, then turned away, without waiting for a single word. Reed closed the door behind him and walked slowly into the living room, where Shape was still resting on the old cushion by the window. The dog flicked one ear at the sound of the door, but didn't lift his head. His tail moved just once, gently, as if to say he had noticed. Reed opened the letter. The handwriting leaned slightly, as if written in a hurry during a night full of thoughts. I used to believe no one could understand the feeling of loss without needing it to be spoken. I used to believe I was the only one who found the world unfamiliar, even while still living inside my own home. But then I saw the image of Shape, and I knew I wasn't alone. There was a pause. Then the letter continued. He didn't bark. He didn't look directly at the camera. But the way he leaned into your knee, closed his eyes and breathed, it made me believe that maybe there are beings in this world who don't need language, don't need a reason, and yet still choose to stay. Reed read to the end, then folded the letter slowly, as if afraid to crease something fragile. He placed it beneath the newspaper clipping on the wall, just above where Shape was lying. The dog remained asleep. His breathing was steady, his back rising and falling gently with the rhythm of a soft tune drifting from the old radio. Reed sat down beside him, his hand resting on the part of Shape's back where the scars used to be. When he first brought him home, that spot had been bruised black and torn open. There were nights Reed had to re-bandage it 3 times because the blood refused to stop. Now the fur had grown back, not even, not smooth, but warm. And beneath his palm, there was real breath. "You don't have to do anything more, you know," Reed whispered, maybe more to himself than to the dog. "You've been enough. Enough for a long time now." The little house was no longer cold. Not because of the heater, but because every corner, from the living room to the windowsill and the entryway, held a warmth that couldn't be measured in degrees. A warmth made of presence. On the wall, near the window where the morning light always passed first, hung a simple wooden frame. Inside it was the photo of Reed and Shape, taken the day the dog was honored. Reed in a suit, his eyes softened, and Shape with his head resting on Reed's knee, not posing, not looking into the camera. Just there. Like always. Beside the frame hung an old collar, once rusted, once flung from his body when he was abandoned at a training ground. Now it was polished clean, with a new metal tag that read, "Shape still here." Below it, on a small table beside the armchair, sat the letter from the girl who had written, saying that Shape's eyes had made her feel less alone. Reed didn't hide the letter in a drawer. He left it standing upright, as if it belonged there. Because he understood, this story was no longer just his. The house began forming habits. Each morning Reed would pour tea, put on a classical record, and Shape would lie exactly at his feet, where the sunlight filtered in and touched his coat that was finally growing in evenly again. Some mornings the dog would sleep. Some mornings he would gaze out at the backyard. But always, there was peace. The kind of peace that comes when someone knows they won't be left behind again. Reed no longer had to explain the nightmares. He didn't need to talk about the past, because the past now had shape and sound, but no longer carried edges sharp enough to cut. It played like an old film in reverse, sometimes surfacing, but never again making his hands tremble or his heart seize. When people asked him, casually, at a gas station or a grocery store or the vet's office, "How did you recover?" Reed didn't say much. He just nodded, pointed to Shape, now a silent yet powerful symbol, and said in a slow voice, like naming something sacred, "I have a friend. He doesn't speak, but he's never walked away." That was it. No more needed. Nothing missing. Real stories don't always need to be long. Sometimes they live in a single look, a gentle lick on the hand, or a steady breath in the middle of the night. That was the truth Reed knew best, after years of his life had been nothing but explosions, shouting, and an emptiness no medicine could reach. Now, each time he woke and heard Shape's footsteps padding through the wooden hallway, he knew he had made it through. He didn't need anyone to certify it. Surviving was proof enough. One afternoon, a small neighbor child came over, stood at the window looking at Shape, and whispered to her mother, "Mom, when I grow up I want to be like that dog." Her mother looked at Reed and smiled. No words were needed, just a small nod, and both sides understood. Some things are bigger than language. Reed turned to Shape. The dog was still dozing, unaware that someone was speaking about him. Yet, as always, he remained. Constant. Days went on. The cactus by the window bloomed again. Sparrows still visited the roof. Reed learned to cook a few more dishes. And Shape, he didn't need to learn anything new. He only needed to live, to breathe, and to stay. And sometimes, on cold nights when the wind slipped through the cracks, Reed would sit beside him, hand resting on his back like those first nights. They didn't need to say a word, because now silence no longer meant emptiness. It had become a language, a form of trust, a kind of love without conditions, without explanations, without needing anything in return. Just being there, that was enough. By nightfall, the small wooden house at the end of the street still held a light. Not a bright one, but a desk lamp. Warm and golden, just enough so that two figures lying side by side did not feel alone. Shape slept peacefully. His eyes fluttered slightly, as if chasing a dream filled with sunlight, wind, and someone who stayed. Reed did not sleep. He simply sat beside him, one hand resting on the dog who had taught him how to live again. Not through words, but through presence. Outside, the wind slipped gently through the old shingles. The scent of wood, warm tea, and quiet breathing blended into a kind of music no recording could capture. Maybe in this world some wounds cannot be healed by medicine. Some people may never find the words for their pain, and yet they are healed anyway by the gaze of a creature who speaks no language and asks for nothing in return. Shape was just a dog. Not a champion, not a prized pedigree, not a hero with medals, but to those who had once been lost, he was the last miracle of waiting. We do not need to be heroes. Sometimes, all it takes is being someone who listens long enough, someone warm enough to hold on to a small, trembling life, whether in the rain, inside a forgotten kennel, or on a sidewalk too busy to notice what is slipping away. Because sometimes, what saves a soul is not wealth or power. It is the moment you choose not to look away. It is a hand that reaches out. It is a whisper that says, "I'm here." If one day you see a small dog curled up under a street lamp, eyes still holding hope, if you hear a whimper from beneath an old porch, if one quiet afternoon, in the middle of your own busy world, a tiny tail wags your way, not begging, not pleading, just simply being there, then please remember this. You may not be able to save the whole world, but to that one life, you are the whole world. And sometimes, a name scratched onto a worn collar is enough to hold on to a soul that almost disappeared. And love, even if small or late, always has room to begin again. All you have to do is choose to stay. Some things don't need to be taught. They only need someone patient enough to listen. And some creatures may never say thank you in words, but they can teach us the one lesson many never learn in a lifetime: how to be human.